Marvel, I inherited the Shadow Realm. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, The End of Hercules Mani. The Plane of Bones is a special place. The gravity here is 100 times that of the god's domain. Ordinary creatures will die if they enter it. Every year, some birds and animals mistakenly enter this place and are crushed alive by the strong gravity. As a result, this plane is covered with corpses and bones, so it is called the Plane of Bones by the world. What the world does not know is that this is also the sleeping place of Hercules Mani. As a god of strength, the strong gravity can help him temper his body and strengthen his strength. Therefore, the Plane of Bones was specially transformed by Mani to temper himself. After leaving the Dark Abyss, Loki went straight to the Plane of Bones. It took several hours to finally arrive at the Plane of Bones. His figure floated above the Kangsham. Loki looked down at the Plane of Bones. Everywhere he looked, there were weathered bones. Seeing this, Loki's mind moved, and suddenly, a black tide gathered on the ground, and then slowly rose up. Soon, hundreds of black shadow ninjas appeared outside the bone plane, looking like a black ocean. At the same time, Loki's voice also sounded at this moment. Go, find the place where Mani is sleeping. After the words fell, the black shadow ninjas immediately moved. One by one, they jumped into the bone plane. As the black shadow ninjas entered, the 100 times gravity of the bone plane seemed to lose its effect, and had no effect on the black shadow ninjas at all. Because their bodies are all made up of dark auras, in essence, black shadow ninjas are like air. Although the 100 times gravity is terrifying, it will also lose its effect when acting on the air. Therefore, the bone plane, which ordinary people fear like a tiger, is like a back garden for the black shadow ninjas, and they can come and go freely. As the black shadow ninjas spread out and explored the entire bone plane, Loki's figure also fell from the sky and stepped into the bone plane. As soon as he entered, an inexplicable gravity suddenly acted on him, causing his body to sink slightly. Feeling the gravity of the bone plane, Loki frowned slightly. As a god, he can naturally withstand 100 times the gravity, but in such an environment, his strength is also affected to a certain extent. 100% of the strength can only be exerted to 80%, which is the advantage of occupying the terrain. In comparison, although Mani's strength did not increase dramatically in the bone plane, one maintained the original strength and the other reduced his strength by 20%, which has already created a huge gap. No wonder these guys like to stay in the sleeping place and never go to other gods' territories easily. Shaking his head and sighing, Loki walked towards the depths of the bone plane, while adapting to the gravity. Compared with the dark abyss full of various dark creatures, the bone plane seemed much quieter. Or it would be more appropriate to say that it was dead silent. Going deep into the bone plane for 100 miles, Loki not only did not see any creatures along the way, but even the sound of snakes, insects, rats and ants was not heard. It was simply a forbidden place for life. For a moment, Loki couldn't help but feel lonely, making him a little bleak. Fortunately, this feeling came and went quickly, and was soon driven away by Loki. Not long after, a picture suddenly flashed in front of his eyes. This was the message from the black shadow ninja. Hercules, Mani, found. Suddenly, Loki's eyes flashed, and he quickly rushed to the direction transmitted by the black shadow ninja. Half an hour later, in the depths of the bone plane, in front of a mountain, Loki's figure stopped directly. This is a mountain dozens of meters high, with jagged rocks, and no green at all. If ordinary people saw this place, it would be very easy to ignore it, but according to the information transmitted by the black shadow ninja, Mani was hiding in this hill. Without hesitation, the flames gathered directly in Loki's hands and soon condensed into a fireball. Loki threw it towards the mountain, and the fireball immediately went straight to the mountain. Boom. The fireball hit the mountain fiercely and exploded instantly. The extremely terrifying explosion tore the rocks and made the entire mountain turbulent instantly. As the smoke and dust dissipated, a huge gap was blown out on the mountain, forming a cave. At the same time, an inexplicable breath was transmitted from the mountain at this moment, as if some terrifying existence was about to be born. Seeing this, Loki's eyes flashed, and he directly summoned the Mind Scepter and held it in his hand, waiting for Manny to appear. He didn't wait too long. Soon, a dull voice came from the mountain. "Who disturbed my sleep?" Manny's voice rippled in all directions, forming a terrifying sound wave. Under the gods, there was almost no resistance to this sound wave. And a loud bang also sounded at this moment, and the mountain, which was tens of meters high, was suddenly torn apart from the middle, just like tearing a piece of rag. Manny's tall body also slowly stepped out of the torn mountain at this moment. Obviously, the scene of tearing the mountain just now was his masterpiece. "It's you." Manny walked out and looked at Loki with a flash of surprise in his eyes. He didn't expect Loki to appear here. After reacting, a grim smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. "If there is a road to heaven, you don't take it. If there is no door to hell, you come to it." After saying that, Manny launched an attack directly, not like Hoddle who looked ahead and behind. As the god of strength, he is good at hands-on, not good at brains. When he meets a nasty guy, he will teach him how to be a man with an iron fist. As for the consequences, that is not what he considers. So, in summary, he is another iron fool, a guy whose brain is filled with muscles. However, he moves fast, and Loki, who has been prepared for a long time, moves fast too. The mind gem emits amazing light, and directly constructs a false world, to drag Manny into it. A series of horrible natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, meteorite falls, etc. broke out directly in the virtual world. With Loki's ability to make illusions come true, Manny was caught off guard. He seemed to be hated by the whole world, and all kinds of disasters swept towards him crazily. If it weren't for his extremely strong body defense, he might have been taken away by the natural disasters constructed by Loki. However, being a god, Manny was no pushover. He burst out with a powerful force, tearing the illusion world apart and reappearing in front of Loki. But compared to before, he looked extremely embarrassed at this moment. "Damn you, you bastard, I'll tear you apart." With anger on his face, Manny roared and rushed towards Loki again. Seeing this, Loki's eyes flashed with divine light, and the mind gem in his hand was activated again. Suddenly, it seemed as if there was an endless space between the two of them. The distance was only a few hundred meters, and no matter how Manny ran, he could not get close to Loki. Chapter 177, The Promotion of the Shadow Kingdom. Realizing something was wrong, Manny's face suddenly changed. At this moment, Loki slowly raised his left hand, and a burst of flames suddenly appeared in his hand, and gradually grew larger, forming a fire dragon. The fire dragon exuded a dangerous aura, and the terrifying high temperature burned the surrounding space, causing a distortion. Seeing this, Manny's face suddenly changed, and a palpitation rose in his heart. At that moment, he turned around and ran without saying a word. He didn't have as many calculations as Hoddle. For him, if he could beat him, he would fight, and if he couldn't beat him, he would run away. It was not shameful. Unfortunately, he overestimated himself and underestimated Loki. From the beginning, Loki didn't take him seriously. Otherwise, he wouldn't have launched an attack so carelessly. Seeing Manny turning around and wanting to leave, a strong mental force suddenly emanated from Loki's mind. Under the amplification of the mind gem, it fell directly on Manny. Suddenly, Manny's body was imprisoned in place. At this moment, he completely lost control of his body. The fire dragon in Loki's hand also broke away from Loki's palm and slowly flew towards Manny. Sensing the danger, Manny hurriedly roared, "Loki, you can't kill me. I'm a god appointed by the God King. If you kill me, the God King will not let you go." Hearing this, Loki laughed. Then he said with a tone of disdain and ridicule, "I'm still the crown prince. Don't you want to kill me too? Don't you think it's too late to tell me this now?" Hearing this, Manny was choked and speechless, but in the face of life and death, he was completely cowardly. "I was wrong. I'm willing to submit to you, and you will be my master from now on." Manny begged for mercy loudly, but unfortunately Loki was not moved at all, and finally watched Manny being swallowed by the fire dragon. The flames burned on his body, and a tragic roar came out of Manny's mouth. His greatest ability is his body, but at this moment, the flesh he was proud of was gradually melting under the burning of the flames. Finally, in endless pain, His body completely turned into ashes, leaving only a head, which fell to the ground. Looking at the dark head, Loki's mind moved, and a black shadow ninja suddenly appeared behind the head, and held the head up. At the same time, Manny opened his eyes again at this moment, looking at Loki with resentment, and cursed, "I will come back, I must take revenge." As he said, he wanted to control the head to leave, only to find that he was held in the arms of a dark creature. Seeing this, Manny's eyelids jumped, and a feeling of uneasiness rose in his heart. "Damn, what is this thing? Let go of my head." Manny roared, and Loki's mouth corners rose at this moment. "If you want revenge, then you can go down and discuss it with Hoddle." After speaking, Loki waved his hand, and the black shadow ninja immediately held Manny's head and merged into the ground, leaving only Manny's curse. Hunting success. Muttering in his mouth, Loki turned and walked away, walking towards the destination of the next target. In the Asgard, Tony also noticed Manny's presence when he entered the Shadow Kingdom. At that moment, Tony's mind moved, and two shadow ninjas appeared behind him, put their hands on his shoulders, and took him into the Shadow Kingdom. He wanted to verify his idea. If things were really as he thought, then the gods would be the powerful resources of the Shadow Core. In the Shadow Kingdom, there was no distinction between up, down, left, and right. The thick and terrifying darkness filled the entire kingdom. As soon as he entered it, Tony felt a strong breath of darkness, hidden in the darkness. These were all dark creatures living in the Shadow Kingdom. However, when the shadow ninjas passed by, the dark creatures fled like mice seeing a cat. Here, the Shadow Core is the master, so when they felt the breath of the Shadow Core, they didn't dare to stay. Tony didn't pay attention to these. Under the leadership of the two shadow ninjas, he soon came to the center of the Shadow Kingdom, where two heads were floating. One head had lost its breath and turned into an empty shell, and even the color of the head was pitch black. It was Hoddle who had completely fallen. The other was Manny, who had just entered the Shadow Kingdom. Compared to his arrogance just now, Manny's face was full of fear as he looked at the darkness around him. Especially when he saw Hoddle's head, he was even more confused. As gods, Hoddle's strength was not comparable to his, but now, his head appeared here, and he had completely lost his soul fluctuations. Coupled with the thick darkness around him, all this filled Manny's heart with fear. Driven by the crisis, he wanted to leave here, but he seemed to be locked in, and could not move at all. He could only stay here. For a while, Manny was so nervous that he almost cried. In the darkness not far from him, Tony stood here and had no idea of going forward. He just came to see if the Shadow Kingdom would devour other gods. As for the others, he was not interested. There was no idea of contacting Manny. Therefore, Manny had no idea that a pair of cold eyes were staring at him in the dark. Time passed little by little, and soon, changes appeared. I saw a dark color gradually appearing on Manny's head, and as time passed, the dark color became heavier, and Manny didn't notice it at all. Seeing this, Tony glanced at Hoddle next to Manny, and a trace of thought flashed in his eyes. So, when the darkness completely infects their heads, can it devour their souls? Tony muttered to himself, and continued to watch the changes. After a few hours, finally, the last bit of Manny's head was covered by darkness. Suddenly, Manny, who was still alive and kicking, had a hollow look in his eyes, and completely lost his soul fluctuations. The Shadow Kingdom also rolled at this moment, and became stronger again. The two shadow ninjas who had been guarding behind Tony had increased their strength by a lot. Sensing all this, Tony's mouth suddenly raised a surprising arc, and in the end, Tony couldn't help but burst into laughter. He found that the gods of the divine realm were simply his gospel. Not only could their souls be used to improve the Shadow Kingdom and the Shadow Core, but their world could also be used to improve the power of the Reality Gem. The creatures in the god realm can be used to feed the devouring shadows. Thinking about this series of benefits, Tony felt that he had made the right decision to come to the god realm. Without staying in the Shadow Kingdom, Tony returned to the Asgard under the leadership of two shadow ninjas. He was now increasingly looking forward to how powerful the Shadow Core would become after devouring the gods. Chapter 178, The Rules of Death and Immortality. In the courtyard, blood rained again, and a strong sense of sadness filled the world. Thor and others looked at this scene with almost frozen faces. Another god has fallen. How is this possible? Thor said with an ugly face, and his tone seemed a little stuttering. There had been no creatures that had fallen for thousands of years, but today two of them had fallen in succession, which completely broke his cognition. Not only him, but Hela beside him also had an ugly face at the moment. She felt that her authority was challenged. She was the god of death in Asgard. But now, the gods of Asgard have fallen, but she didn't know that this was the biggest provocation to her. Go to Asgard. Hela snorted and ordered, and then turned around and flew towards Asgard. Seeing this, Thor, who had come back to his senses, shrank his pupils and hurried forward to stop him, saying, "No, if you go to Asgard now, you will be trapped. Get out of the way," Hela said coldly. But Thor shook his head firmly. Every bit of strength is the key to his victory over Tony, not to mention a strong man like Hela. He can't let Hela go to Tony now. I said, if you go now, you will be trapped. Who gave you the courage to block my way? Hela's mouth curled up in a cold arc, and two rays of divine light suddenly shot out from her eyes. A strong sense of oppression, centered on her, radiated to the surroundings. The captain and others felt their breath suffocated at this moment, and their faces were full of tension. These two people are not going to fight now. Several people thought anxiously, and Thor's face became serious when he saw this scene. He knew that he was not Hela's opponent, but he would not give way, and still insisted, "What we have to do now is to gather everyone's strength to fight Tony, not to be impulsive. You also saw that Tony can really kill gods, don't be impulsive." Thor continued to persuade, but unfortunately, Hela had no patience. Boom. The terrifying divine power instantly spread out from her hand, forming a giant palm, and slapped Thor. Thor's pupils shrank. Thor's hammer appeared in his palm, and thunder filled his body. A dazzling lightning directly met the giant palm. The attacks of the two collided instantly, but the imagined evenly matched did not appear. Although Thor's divine power has increased tenfold, it is still far behind Hela. This is not only a quantitative difference, but also a qualitative difference. Therefore, a collision with his attack was directly crushed by Hela, and the whole process was crushed. Then the giant palm fell on Thor and slapped him away. Bang! His figure hit the ground with a loud noise, and a huge pit appeared on the ground. In response, Hela didn't even look at it, and her figure quickly flew towards the Asgard. Looking at Hela's departing back, Thor spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. His face was filled with a trace of black air, which was a sign that the power of death had invaded his body. Helplessly, he could only watch Hela leave and sit cross-legged on the ground to expel the power of death. As for the captain and others, they all came to Thor's side with a nervous look on their faces to help him protect the law. Asgard, since a series of events happened, Asgard has temporarily fallen. Odin fled to the Blue Star, the gods hid in their own sleeping places, and the only guardian Heldam was killed by Hela. Therefore, Asgard is now like a dead place, with no other living beings except Tony. When Hela descended on Asgard, Tony suddenly felt something in his heart, and opened his eyes in the palace. "Oh, interesting." Muttering in his mouth, Tony's mouth curled up a smile, and his figure flashed and disappeared in the palace. When he appeared again, Tony had already arrived at the Asgard square, looking at the sky not far away. In the sky, a black dot kept approaching, and soon showed the figure of Hela. Just when Tony saw Hela, Hela also discovered Tony's existence. Looking at Tony, Hela remembered what Thor had said along the way, and a trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. She is the goddess of death. She is a strong man comparable to Odin. She is confident that she is no worse than anyone, so she wants to prove herself. "In my name, I grant you death." The chanting sounded in her mouth, and Hela directly used her divine power to deprive Tony of his life. A rule from the dark descended and enveloped Tony. Sensing the fluctuations from the void, Tony stood still, with a smile still on his lips. Finally, the rule of death descended and wanted to deprive Tony of his life. But at this moment, a more domineering force emanated from Tony, which was the immortal power of the dog talisman. Under the impact of this force, the rule of death was directly dispersed, the rule was broken, and Hela was immediately backlashed, and a mouthful of blood spurted out of her mouth. Puff! There was a trace of blood at the corner of Hela's mouth and she looked at Tony solemnly. She felt that Tony had the rule of immortality. What Steve said was true, this guy is really immortal. After confirming this, Hela was immediately filled with pressure. No one would feel relaxed when facing an immortal guy. But Tony's voice finally sounded slowly. Didn't you want to cooperate with me before? Why are you killing me as soon as we meet now? They say women change their minds quickly, but you are too fast. Tony said in a teasing tone, his eyes full of teasing. Hela did not answer this question, but stared at Tony seriously and said, you killed 2 gods. Why can you completely kill the gods? Isn't your goal also to hunt the gods? Isn't it good for me to help you? Tony raised his eyebrows. That is my authority. You are stealing my authority now. Hela roared angrily. And Tony suddenly felt a sense of enlightenment in his heart. Why did this crazy woman suddenly come to him? As the goddess of death of Asgard, when the gods die and devour the souls of the gods, her strength can be increased accordingly, which is also one of the reasons why she has always wanted to hunt the gods. But now, with the complete demise of the 2 gods, this is equivalent to stealing her future power, and she will naturally not be willing to accept this. Although Tony has thought this through, he will not back down. Not to mention that Hela is now involved with Thor. He will not give up just because the souls of the gods can enhance the power of the Shadow Army. So, looking at the angry Hela, Tony raised the corner of his mouth and said, so that's how it is. But so what? It's stolen. You are a waste. You can't find the whereabouts of the gods for such a long time. Also, aren't you involved with Thor? Are you sure he will let you hunt the gods? Chapter 179. I don't believe no one can cure you. Tony stared at her with a half smile, which made her speechless. However, she was not here to reason with Tony. Humph. With a cold snort, her figure instantly disappeared in the air. When she reappeared, she was already above Tony's head. A whip kick fell down, and the terrifying force acceleration immediately caused a series of sonic booms in the space. Bang, bang, bang. Seeing this scene, Tony's eyes flashed, and he grabbed it casually. Suddenly, Hela's attack was firmly caught by Tony. A gust of wind blew, and air currents were raised around. Seeing that Tony actually grabbed her foot with one hand, Hela's pupils shrank instantly, and the whole person quickly changed his moves, using his left leg as a support point, and kicked Tony's chest with his right leg. Tony did not dodge, and Hela's right leg hit Tony's chest directly. Bang! A sound like morning bells and evening drums rang out instantly. Tony's body was like alloy, resisting Hela's attack without any injury. He even smiled. Your strength is good, but your speed is not good enough. Don't be polite, I'm okay. Tony teased. His body shook, and his whole body exerted force at the same time, and Hela was shaken away fiercely. Hela felt an unmatched force acting on her. She wanted to resist, but her strength was like the difference between a child and an adult when facing Tony's explosive force. She couldn't resist at all. Boom. In the end, her body slammed heavily into the ground, and a huge pit was smashed out of the ground. Cough cough. A cough sounded from the pit. Hela looked grey and embarrassed at the moment. The sternum that was slightly sunken was now recovering rapidly under the effect of the regeneration and healing factor. When she looked at Tony, she saw that Tony was looking down at her with a smile on his face. Hela's strength is not weak, even stronger than Malekith. Before coming to the god's domain, Tony could only fight her on equal terms. But after fusing the tiger spell, all his abilities have greatly increased in power. Now he is at least 3 times stronger than when he fought with Odin, which is why he is almost crushed. It seems that your strength is not as strong as your words. In this case, I will not be polite. Tony looked at Hela and said slowly, and his momentum changed. Hearing this, a sense of horror suddenly surged into Hela's heart. She felt as if she was being stared at by something terrifying, and her whole scalp was numb. Before she could say anything, Tony, who had been passively beaten, finally took action. 2 dazzling lasers shot out from his eyes. The lasers cut through the air with scorching heat. Hela's face changed, and she quickly mobilized the divine power in her body to form a shield in front of her. Bang! With an explosion, the laser collided with the shield, and Hela's figure was lifted off again, and the shield exploded directly. Before her figure landed, suddenly, the temperature around her rose rapidly, and a flame burned from the void in an instant, surrounding her. Feeling the terrifying temperature around her, Hela's heart tightened, and she felt the breath of death. Ha! With a loud shout, Hela no longer held back, and the surging divine power poured into her body, isolating her body from the surrounding space. Soon, the flames swept her body under Tony's control, and Hela was surrounded by the flames. Sizzle. A sound like barbecue sounded, and the shield that Hela covered her body was burned by the flames at a speed visible to the naked eye. No matter how she infused power, the filling was far less than the consumption. So, with a click, the shield that Hela built around her body suddenly shattered. The raging flames also acted directly on her body. Ah! A scream full of misery sounded, and Hela's face suddenly became distorted. Her body, hair, clothes, everything, gradually turned into ashes under the high temperature. The whole scene looked extremely horrifying. Seeing that Hela was about to turn into ashes, at this moment, Hela's voice rang out, while holding back the pain. Astral projection. As soon as the words fell, a transparent shadow emerged from Hela's body that was about to be destroyed, and quickly escaped from the range of the flames. Soon, her body was devoured by the flames, and turned into ashes, leaving only her soul floating in the air, with a trace of fear in her eyes. Not far away, Tony looked at this scene and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. He didn't expect Hela to have such a skill. But it doesn't matter. She was not his opponent in her heyday, let alone like this. While thinking, Tony was about to continue to take action, but before he could make a move, Hela suddenly stretched out her hand to open up a space channel, and the whole person went directly into it and disappeared in an instant. Because of the speed, Tony didn't even have time to stop her. He could only watch Hela go into the space channel and leave. Seeing this, Tony gave up the idea of continuing to chase. Hela is different from other gods. Hela is connected to the entire Asgard. If he wants to kill her completely, he must destroy Asgard together. Only in this way can all her life be cut off. Although Tony beat Hela very miserably now, he doesn't believe that he can kill her in one fell swoop. So, since she ran away, let her run away. He was too lazy to continue chasing. Shaking his head, Tony retracted his gaze and turned back to the palace. On the other side, tens of millions of miles away from the Asgard, Hela's figure fell from the space channel, and the whole person was gasping for breath. Compared with just now, her figure has become much more transparent at this moment. Obviously, opening the space channel consumes a lot of her. Looking at her current appearance, Hela's face showed a bitter smile. Today's battle was a huge blow to her. She had always thought that no one could beat her except Odin. But now, her body was broken by a mortal, and only her soul remained. Although her strength did not decrease because of losing her body, the blow to her was unprecedentedly heavy. At this moment, she couldn't help but think of Thor's previous evaluation of Tony, and murmured, "Invincible? It's true that you are strong, but even if I'm not your opponent, I don't believe that no one can beat you." At the end of her words, her tone was full of chill, like ice that had not melted for thousands of years, enough to freeze a person alive. After a long while, she restrained the resentment on her face, followed the induction in the dark, and went to the place where the army of the undead was. Chapter 180, Inviting Odin to Return. In the courtyard border town, as Hela left, the army of the undead temporarily stopped advancing and stationed here. Although Thor and others were worried about Tony's threat, they wanted to find the gods as soon as possible and obtain enough combat power. But they still needed the help of the army of the undead, so they could only wait here with them. Suddenly, a figure came from the distant sky. Thor immediately felt it and looked up. When he saw clearly that it was Hela, Thor was relieved instantly. Before Hela came to find Tony, he was really afraid that Tony would kill Hela, so he was always worried. Now that he saw Hela return, he could rest assured. However, this feeling did not last long. As Hela approached, he soon found something wrong. How did Hela become a soul body? When he thought of this, Thor's face suddenly changed, and he hurried to meet her. When the two met, looking at Hela with a transparent body, Thor's face suddenly showed a complex color. "You." After saying one word, he suddenly couldn't continue, fearing to open Hela's scar. But Hela didn't care about it at all, and took the initiative to answer. "You are right, that Tony is indeed powerful. I apologize for my previous recklessness." Hearing this, Thor's expression became more complicated. Before, Hela was as proud as she could be. Just like a high-ranking white swan, she didn't even bother to look down at the creatures on the ground. But now, she actually apologized on her own initiative, which was simply a miracle. Fortunately, Thor didn't sigh for too long, and soon sorted out his mood, and asked Hela about what happened. As the saying goes, knowing yourself and the enemy, you can fight 100 battles without danger. Although Hela has become like this, she should have learned some information about Tony. He can only try to think about things in a positive direction. Hela had nothing to hide about this, so she told him the whole battle process and finally commented with a serious face, "This is a scary guy. I'm afraid that, even if the gods join forces, they may not be his opponent." Hearing this, Thor's heart sank. He did not doubt Hela's judgment. He was just worried that Tony was so powerful, so how could they stop him? For a while, a silent silence lingered between the two of them, and the atmosphere seemed very low. At this time, the sky once again condensed blood clouds, and the blood rain scattered with the wind. A sense of sadness once again enveloped the world. Looking at this scene, Hela and Thor looked up at the sky at the same time, their eyes full of surprise, and an invisible pressure oppressed their hearts. "This is the third god," Hela said in a low voice. "I have seen the fall of the gods and the impending destruction of Asgard." As soon as these words came out, Thor's face changed suddenly. As the goddess of death, Hela's words almost predicted the end of the gods. At that moment, Thor asked anxiously, "Is there any way to stop all this?" Hearing this, Hela looked up at him and said slowly, "Our main task now is to deal with Tony. If we can deal with him, then nothing else matters. Otherwise, no matter how much we do in other things, it will not change the outcome of Asgard in the end. So, we need strong people who can deal with Tony. Don't count on the gods. Those guys can't even beat me. It's a joke to expect them to resist Tony." At the end, Hela's tone was full of disdain. Obviously, she didn't believe that the gods could change the outcome of things. Thor didn't refute this. If he still had the confidence to gather the power of the gods to fight Tony before, then with Hela's defeat, he knew that it was impossible to rely on the gods to fight Tony. What's more, the gods are still falling now. God knows how many of them will be left when he gathers them. Slowly exhaling a breath of foul air, Thor suppressed the excitement in his heart and said in a deep voice, "In this case, we can only let Father come back to take charge of the situation." Odin? Hela said this name, and her expression suddenly became complicated. The relationship between her and Odin can be described in one word as a mixture of love and hate, with more hatred. If it weren't for Tony, she would never have been with Odin, but thinking about Tony's horror, she finally nodded. "In this case, then you go find the old guy. What about you?" Thor asked curiously. Hearing this, Hela glanced at him, and did not hide it, and slowly said, "One Odin is not enough to stop that guy, so I will find another strong man. By the way, I need the flesh and blood of living beings to restore my body, so I need to continue attacking the courtyard." After saying this, Thor opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but looking at Hela's calm eyes, he finally swallowed the words that came to his mouth again. Now that the two sides have finally reached a formal cooperation, he doesn't want to make the relationship stiff because of some things. So, although he knew that the flesh and blood Hela needed might not be a small amount, he remained silent. After discussing the follow-up matters, the two did not hesitate and took action quickly. Thor went to Blue Star alone to persuade Odin to return, and the captain and others helped Hela continue to fight in the courtyard and collect the flesh and blood of creatures to help her restore her body. For this, the captain and others were opposed at first, but under Thor's persuasion, they finally agreed. The former hero eventually became a dragon. This matter has to be said to be somewhat ironic. However, the creatures of the god's domain have nothing to do with them. Since Thor has already decided, they naturally won't say much. The most important thing is that they are now dealing with Tony and saving the entire god's domain, so it is reasonable to sacrifice some people. Everyone is taking action, everyone is running, and similarly, the gods are not idle at this moment. The god's sorrow was triggered 3 times in a row, and even if they were in a deep sleep, they were completely awakened. So, after waking up, the gods panicked. They are high and mighty gods, they don't want to die, they want to live. Therefore, the death of the three gods completely stimulated them, causing them to come out of their slumbering places and gather together to discuss countermeasures. By the way, they also want to figure out who killed the three gods in succession and cause them to fall completely. At first they thought it was Hela. After all, only Hela could easily cause the gods to fall completely, but after investigation, they suddenly discovered that the murderer was not Hela, but a guy they hated, Loki. Chapter 181 The God Strikes Back. The Void God Realm is a virtual land that was opened up by the gods for communication or trade. At this moment, the Void God Realm is full of gods. Of course, they are not their real bodies, but just a trace of their thoughts. On the main seat, the god of water, who was the initiator of the party, looked at the gathered gods and cleared his throat and said, "Everyone, I believe you all know what happened. Huddle, Mani, Modi, they have completely fallen." As soon as these words came out, there was a sudden silence below, and a sense of grief lingered among the gods. Looking at the silent gods, T continued, "It has been a long time since the gods have completely fallen. So, we must not sit idly by, otherwise, the fate of Huddle and the other two will be the fate of all of us in the future." At the end of his speech, T's tone became high, which aroused the approval of the gods. "Who is hunting us? Is it Hela? This is a newly awakened god, and it is obvious that he has not figured out the situation yet." "No, it's not Hela, it's Loki," T said with a cold look. As soon as these words came out, the gods who didn't know about this matter started to boil. "Loki, he is so brave, he dared to hunt us gods. We can't just let it go." As the gods spoke one after another, the scene became a little chaotic for a while. Seeing this, T quickly raised his hand to calm them down and said, "Everyone calm down, but Loki certainly doesn't have the courage, so there is someone behind him." "Who is it?" a god asked. "Tony, the mortal who helped us before," T said. After the words fell, the gods who were originally full of anger suddenly calmed down and exchanged glances one by one. Seeing this, T's face was stunned. This was different from what he imagined. Why did these guys calm down? He was still thinking about gathering the anger of the gods and targeting Tony together. Just when he was a little dazed, another god below spoke up. "T, the mortal you mentioned, is it the one who killed Malekith?" "Yes." T nodded. After getting the answer, the gods below became even more silent. Seeing this, T also reacted to the concerns of these guys. He rolled his eyes and said, "I know that guy is very strong, but no matter how strong he is just a mortal. We are gods, do we still have to be afraid of a mortal?" T spoke bluntly, his words full of arrogance as a god. Even though he knew Tony was very powerful, he still felt that after all the gods gathered together, a mere mortal would not be their opponent. Seeing that everyone was still hesitating, T twitched the corner of his mouth, knocked on the table and said, "Everyone, I know what you are worried about. But please don't forget one thing. Now it's not a question of whether we should deal with him or not, but a question of whether he is willing to let us go. Unless you are willing to wait for Loki to come and kill you one by one. Otherwise, we must fight back. Otherwise, there will be no way for us to survive in the gods' realm." T's words fell into the ears of the gods and immediately woke them up. They were only concerned about Tony's strength, but forgot that they no longer had the right to choose. Thinking of this, someone among the gods below quickly spoke up. "What should we do now? Let's join forces and deal with Tony together." Hearing this, T shook his head. "No hurry, we can deal with Loki first. Kill Loki to give Tony a warning. If he continues to be our enemy, then we will join forces to kill him. At worst, we will die and wait for rebirth in the future." Hearing that they didn't have to fight Tony directly, the gods breathed a sigh of relief. They immediately spoke up and agreed. "What T said makes sense, so let's start with Loki and get rid of this guy first." Soon, the gods discussed the details again and then ended this meeting. As the gods' thoughts dissipated, after a while, the Void God Realm, which was originally full of people, quickly became deserted. In the end, only T was left, sitting in the main seat, muttering, "Chaos, chaos. Heroes emerge in troubled times, and the pattern of the god realm should also change." After speaking, T's figure slowly dissipated. As the saying goes, where there are people, there are rivers and lakes. Similarly, the realm of gods is full of power struggles. It's just that Odin has always been suppressing them, so even if the gods have any ideas, they can only keep them in their hearts. But now, the entire realm of gods is in chaos. Although it is full of dangers, it is also full of opportunities. Therefore, many gods have their own little tricks in their hearts. And Tyr is one of them. Even his ambition is greater than that of others. He wants to ascend the throne of the king of gods, so he will come forward to organize the gods in order to establish his prestige. Next, as long as he can lead the gods to solve Loki and then solve Tony, he believes that his wish to ascend the throne of the king of gods can be fulfilled. Thinking about this in his heart, after returning from the void realm of gods, T walked out of the sleeping place as soon as possible. Next, he will lead the gods to hunt Loki. Endless Canyon. This is the sleeping place of the god of Revenge Valley, and he is also Loki's fourth target. The Endless Canyon stretches for tens of millions of miles, as if it is endless, so it is named after this. Looking at the canyon, that seemed to have no end, in order to find Valley, Loki summoned a large number of black shadow ninjas to search everywhere, while he himself slowly moved towards the depths of the canyon. He didn't have to wait too long. The Black Shadow core was as powerful as ever. Soon, Loki received Valley's location and quickly went there. Just as he approached Valley's sleeping place, a voice suddenly rang out, echoing in the canyon. "Loki, what are you doing in my sleeping place?" Hearing this voice, Loki was startled. He didn't expect Valley to wake up so soon. Before, when he hunted gods, he was the first to wake up the gods. Now Valley woke up when he approached. Was it a coincidence? A trace of doubt arose in his heart, and Loki quickly replied, "I came here, of course, to find you for something. Please come out and see me. Don't worry, it's definitely a good thing." As he spoke, Loki approached quickly. At this time, Waller's voice sounded again. "Heh, you want to kill me?" After these words came out, Loki's face froze, and he stood there in a daze. It was not that he felt guilty after being seen through, but how did this guy know? Chapter 180 To the next god, to fall completely as you. Thinking with some surprise in his heart, Loki naturally would not admit it, but showed a friendly smile. "Valley, what are you thinking? We have no grudges, how could I kill you?" As he spoke, he had already arrived in front of a stone palace, where Valley was sleeping. At this time, a figure also walked out of the stone palace. He was carrying a bow and arrow on his back, with his upper body naked, revealing his strong muscles. He was the god of revenge, Valley. Looking at the hypocritical smile on Loki's face, Valley snorted disdainfully. "If you want to fight, then fight. Stop pretending. Look at the arrow." After saying that, Valley took off the longbow on his back, condensed his divine power into an arrow, and shot an arrow at Loki. The arrow was fast and urgent, and it instantly came in front of Loki, causing Loki's pupils to shrink. At that moment, without having time to think about it, Loki's body suddenly bent back and dodged the arrow. But even so, Loki felt a burning pain on his face, which was the pain left by the strong wind when the arrow passed through his face. Seeing this scene, Valley did not hesitate and continued to shoot arrows. 3 streams of light cut through the air and whistled towards Loki again. This time, the 3 arrows were in a triangular shape, blocking his body and making it impossible for him to dodge. Helplessly, Loki could only activate the mind gem to make his body illusory and let the arrows pass through his body. At the same time, Loki also launched a counterattack at this moment. Although he didn't know how Valley saw through his purpose, his goal was to get rid of him. Even if he was prepared, Loki was very confident in his strength. A mere god was not his opponent. With a thought, a lava troll suddenly appeared beside Valley. Valley, who was about to continue shooting arrows to suppress Loki, had not reacted yet, and the terrifying explosion had already appeared beside him. A strong shockwave hit him, interrupting his attack and sending him flying. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out of his mouth, and Waller's face turned red. But as the god of vengeance, the greater the damage the enemy inflicted, the stronger his explosive power would be. So, without paying attention to his injuries, Wally quickly stood firm, firing arrows in his hand, forming a series of phantoms, and making a 9-star chain. And in order to prevent Loki from becoming a body again, this time, he attacked not Loki's body, but his soul. Just like a tracking missile, as long as it does not hit the target, it will continue to pursue the target. Seeing this, Loki only felt a sharp pain in his eyebrows and a vague feeling of being torn apart. He knew that this was an illusion after his soul was locked, and he also knew that he could not dodge. At that moment, Loki could not help but take a deep breath, and the mind gem lit up again, blessing his mental power. Suddenly, a majestic mental power emerged, turning into a spear, and rushed towards the arrow. Boom. 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 A series of explosions appeared, and the spears transformed by spiritual power directly hit the 9 stars in a row, directly detonating the 9 arrows. The horrible explosions hit Loki's spiritual power, making Loki feel as if his head was hit hard by a sledgehammer, and his head was dizzy. Similarly, Wally was not much better at this moment. In order to lock Loki's soul, his arrows also contained his spiritual power. As the arrows exploded, his spiritual power was also destroyed by Loki's spiritual power. When a scream came out of his mouth, his face turned extremely pale. After a long time, the smoke and dust from the explosion slowly dissipated, and the figures of Loki and the other person also appeared in each other's eyes. Although Loki's face was pale, he was still able to stand steadily in place. In comparison, Wally looked shaky at the moment, giving people a feeling that he might fall at any time. It can be said that, if nothing unexpected happened, Loki had already locked the victory in this battle in advance. Seeing this scene, Loki himself breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he was about to kill. But at this moment, Valley laughed, and his laughter was full of joy, without any sense of death. Seeing this, Loki frowned immediately. "What are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at you to death," Valley replied. A bad premonition suddenly rose in Loki's heart. Combined with Valley's reaction before, he felt something was wrong. At that moment, Loki wanted to leave this place without thinking. He even gave up the prey that was about to be caught. It was a decisive batch. Unfortunately, it was too late now. Just when he wanted to leave the endless canyon, a huge seal suddenly appeared above the endless canyon, completely cutting off his retreat. Seeing this, Loki's footsteps paused, his eyes quickly swept around, and at the same time, his words slowly rang out at this moment. "Since you are here, then come out. Hiding like a rat in a sewer is simply shameful." As soon as he finished speaking, figures appeared around Loki, including the god of water, the god of justice and truth, Vinciti, the god of the forest, Vidar, the god of hunting, Allah. Together with the god of revenge, Valley, Loki was surrounded by 4 gods at this moment. This scene was so similar to the scene on the spaceship that Loki couldn't help laughing. "You really gave me face. 4 gods surrounded me to kill me. It was the same last time. It seems that you hate me very much." Listening to Loki's words, T slowly took a step forward and said, "No, you are wrong. It's not us who hate you, but you who hate us. We just want to nip the danger in the bud." "Really?" Loki curled his lips without comment. "How did you know I was here?" Loki asked curiously. 3 gods have fallen. Do you think we can still sit still? So, I have sent a message to the gods. If you find your trace, report it as soon as possible. Send a message. Do you think you are the king of gods, Odin? Loki sneered disdainfully. He didn't care about his ridicule, but persuaded him to surrender. "You have seen the current situation. You can't escape. Surrender." "Oh, what do you want me to surrender for?" "I need Tony's information. In addition, you have to help us deal with Tony. This is the condition for us to accept you," T said calmly. The reason why he was willing to accompany Loki to chat here was for this. Otherwise, they could have taken action just now. "I see, but what if I don't want to surrender?" "Then you will refuse to accept the toast. I guarantee that the next god to fall completely will be you," T said seriously, and the atmosphere in the canyon gradually became depressing. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, What kind of storm can the Alliance stir up? Loki didn't speak, and neither did anyone else. Silence spread among the crowd. T gradually lost his patience and issued an ultimatum. Don't think about stalling for time. We have blocked the space. You can't escape. Even if you have a message, you can't pass it on. I'll give you 3 more breaths. Either surrender or be destroyed. The countdown starts now. Are you so sure you can beat me? Loki raised his eyebrows. T's face suddenly changed, and he punched out. Boom. A terrifying sonic boom sounded, and T's fist landed directly on Loki's body. Suddenly, Loki's figure shattered like glass fragments. The gods watching this scene changed their expressions. Illusion. When? Tyr asked in confusion. And Loki's voice still echoed in their ears. When you appeared, I was just trying to trick you. I didn't expect you to really come out. You scared me to death. Loki said in a teasing tone, without any sign of being scared. Hearing this, Tyr's face turned cold. Your method is not bad, but do you think I can't find you if you hide? Vidar, find him for me. Tyr ordered, and Vidar nodded. At that moment, green life energy was sprinkled in the canyon. Suddenly, plants quickly broke out of the soil. In a blink of an eye, the endless canyon, which was originally a little desolate, was covered with lush greenery. As the plants grew, Vidar's perception spread all over the canyon. Suddenly, he pointed to a certain place. The next second, Ulla and Vinciti launched an attack instantly. 2 energy light waves rushed directly to the place where Vidar pointed. Boom. A terrifying explosion sounded, the rocks exploded, and the plants that had just grown were completely destroyed, but Loki was the only one missing. Seeing this, everyone's brows frowned immediately, and he turned to look at Vidar, wanting to ask what was going on. At this moment, Vidar also explained, he was there, and he is still there now, but we can't seem to touch him. After that, Loki's voice continued, when it is true, and when it is false, it is true. It doesn't matter if there are many people. If you can't touch me, it's just a waste of effort. As he said, Loki even took the initiative to show his figure, and stood there with his hands folded with a smile, watching Tyr and others. Looking at this scene, T took a deep breath, and suppressed his irritation. He didn't expect Loki to have such a method, which made all his arrangements a joke. Just as he said, if you can't touch people, everything is a waste of effort. Just when he was irritable, Valley, who had been regulating his breath for half a day, finally recovered, opened his eyes, looked at Loki and smiled. We can't touch your body, but can your soul also be true and false like your body? After these words came out, Loki's face changed slightly, and T, who was a little irritated, suddenly brightened up. Loki's illusion combined with the mind gem was very powerful, but as Wally said, if he could make his body look like a illusion, how could he make his soul look like a illusion? After all, the soul is the root of a person's existence, and illusions cannot work on the soul at all. With an idea in mind, Tyr immediately ordered, use soul attacks, kill him. After the words fell, the gods nodded, and quickly launched attacks one by one. Although they were not very good at soul attacks, they all had 1 or 2 tricks. After all, as gods, they had encountered too many situations, and would learn a little bit of everything. Soon, attacks roared towards Loki, and blocked all his retreat routes. This time, Loki could no longer ignore them, and could only choose to resist. Fortunately, although the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations, it was not very bad. With the mind gem in hand, his mental power was very strong, which could almost be said to be his most powerful field, so even if he was fighting one against many, he could still hold on. And watching Loki resist the attacks of all of them by himself, his murderous intent became even stronger. If they don't kill such a dangerous person this time, they will be in trouble in the future. So, after watching Loki resist their attacks, T quickly ordered, don't stop. Keep going. Even if it takes a lot of time today, we must kill him. Hearing this, everyone nodded and attacked more vigorously. Loki also felt a pressure at this moment. Although he could still hold on, if he continued like this, he might really be exhausted to death. Thinking of this, Loki was a little anxious, but fortunately he could still call for help, so he didn't panic. Although Tyr and others blocked the space, so that he couldn't even pass the message. However, no matter how hard he blocked it, he couldn't block the Shadow Kingdom. He could still pass the message through the Shadow Kingdom. While thinking, Loki summoned a shadow ninja, hiding in the dark, and asked him to pass the message. Asgard, the palace where Tony lived. After driving away Hela, he returned to the palace and studied the formation. Suddenly, a picture appeared in front of him, which was the scene of Loki being beaten up. Tony raised his eyebrows immediately. It seems that these guys are not slow to react. They united so quickly. It's interesting. Then let me see for myself what kind of storm you can stir up by joining forces. As he spoke, Tony stood up and took a step forward. The next second Tony's figure suddenly appeared above the endless canyon. He was so willful that his speed had almost surpassed the speed of light. No matter where he went, it was almost an instant. Only when he crossed the galaxy would it take a little longer. His eyes flashed, and he penetrated the seal at a glance, and saw Loki struggling in the canyon. Tony's mouth suddenly raised a smile, and then raised his hand and pressed down. A terrifying force fell directly on the seal, and there was only a click. The seal that Loki could not break was broken by Tony's casual palm. At the same time, in the canyon, Tyr and others who were originally beating Loki suddenly heard the sound from above their heads. Their faces suddenly changed, and they quickly looked up at the sky. When the gods saw Tony hanging in the air, they all shuddered, and their bodies began to shake. Why is he here? Vader stuttered. He had felt Tony's strength up close in the previous battle with the Dark Elves, so when he saw Tony appear, his fighting spirit was instantly shattered. The others, although a little stronger than him, were not much stronger. Only Tyr, although his brows were furrowed, was still not afraid. Chapter 184. You are such a good person. Looking at the high and mighty Tony, a feeling of dissatisfaction suddenly rose into his heart. He was a god, a high and mighty god. How could he tolerate a mere mortal standing above him? However, although he was unhappy, he was not stupid, and knew that there was a huge gap between him and Tony. Therefore, he forced himself to suppress the dissatisfaction in his heart, took the initiative to step forward and said, "Lord Tony, why are you here?" T said in a neutral tone, neither awe nor disrespect. After all, Tony and the gods have not officially torn their faces. Although everyone knows that Loki is helping him, as long as Tony does not personally take action, there is always a fig leaf between the two sides. Looking at his appearance, Tony raised his eyebrows and immediately became interested. Since showing his strength, Tyr is the first one who dares to speak to him in this tone. At that moment, Tony couldn't help but feel a little interested. I just happened to pass by here, so I wanted to see what happened. Tony made up an excuse. Although everyone knew that this excuse was nonsense, they still pretended to believe it. So that's it. Loki betrayed the gods, so we are cleaning up the mess. If Master Tony is not in a hurry and is willing to wait, how about we finish the things here first? T suggested. Hearing this, Tony smiled, with a hint of teasing in his eyes. Don't you know that Loki is my man? He asked with some curiosity. In response, T shook his head directly. I really don't know that. I only know that he is a god in the realm of gods, but he betrayed the gods and even hunted the gods. Such a treacherous guy. Why don't we help you deal with him, so as to avoid implicate you in the future? Oh. So, do I have to thank you? Tony asked curiously. T waved his hand generously. No need, this is what we should do. Hearing this, Tony was immediately angry and laughed. This guy lied with his eyes open, without any preparation. Such shameless words came out of his mouth, but there was a sense of rightness. He really took himself for a fool. Thinking of this, the smile on Tony's face slowly disappeared, replaced by a coldness. Do you think I'm stupid to believe you? After saying this, T sighed and shook his head. Why does the Lord have to protect him? Isn't it good for everyone to pretend to be stupid and end this matter? If you protect Loki today, you will completely cut off your relationship with the gods. If the Lord wants to control the realm of the gods, it is impossible without the help of the gods. So, why don't you each take a step back? T said angrily. What he said was all true. He thought Tony wanted to control the realm of the gods and become the king of the gods. Naturally, he would need the help of the gods at that time. So this was one of his reasons for facing Tony directly, carrying the will of the gods, and forcing Tony to give in. It must be said that there are indeed fewer fools these days. If it were a normal situation, his speculation would be basically correct. Unfortunately, what he is facing now is not a normal situation. Tony has never thought about taking charge of the god's domain, but wants to swallow up the god's domain, so the existence of the gods is not only of no help to him, but even an obstacle. Therefore, just after T finished speaking, a sneer appeared on Tony's face. What you said does make some sense, but what if I don't retreat? How are you going to convince me? At this point, the gunpowder smell between the two sides became more and more intense. Vida and others didn't dare to speak at all at the side. Not everyone has the courage like T to compete with a top powerhouse. Don't retreat. T smiled, but the smile seemed very cold. I'm afraid that's beyond your control, sir. I've already contacted the gods to prevent you from showing up. If you're unwilling to back down, I'm afraid the gods will attack you together. I don't think you want to see this situation. T was very confident. This was another trump card he prepared for Tony. He didn't believe that with the combined power of the gods, so many of them couldn't deal with one person. It can be said that, even if Odin was here, he would have to weigh his options again and again when facing the gods joining forces. However, he met Tony, not Odin. Before the fusion of the tiger spell, his strength was already on par with Odin, and after the fusion, he surpassed Odin by a large margin. Now he has obtained the immortality of the dog spell. Therefore, with a strength stronger than everyone else and guaranteed immortality, he is not afraid of the gods joining together, let alone the creatures of the entire god's domain. What's more, he hates others threatening him the most in his life, and it's even more disgusting when it's such an ant-like character. Pa pa pa. A round of applause sounded. Tony smiled and nodded. Very good reasoning, but unfortunately I guessed wrong. There is no reward. Now, I'll give you a chance. Call all the gods, otherwise, you will all die here today. Tony issued the ultimatum in a calm tone. His words did not contain any emotion, just like a piece of cold ice, making everyone's body tremble subconsciously. And his face changed after hearing this. This seemed to be a little different from the script he imagined. But the words have come to this point. He can no longer retreat. So, looking at Tony's eyes, T gritted his teeth and said, I will definitely make you pay the price for your arrogance. After saying that, T quickly began to contact the gods, and Tony did not do anything, just stood there quietly with his hands folded and waited. The gods were originally his hunting targets, but it was too troublesome to find them one by one. So, when someone told him that he could gather this group of prey, Tony had already decided to wait and see how things developed. If he could gather all the gods together, Tony would even thank him. Not only did it save him a lot of time, but it also saved him countless troubles. So, facing T's behavior of asking for help, Tony was not angry, but even very happy. He subconsciously muttered to himself, what a good man. Just when Tony's eyes revealed joy, T, who had been looking for help, but did not ignore Tony, blinked. Was he dazzled? Why did this guy laugh when he heard that he was being targeted? Is he so confident that, even if the gods joined forces, they couldn't do anything to him? With a mess of thoughts in his mind, T's actions did not stop at all. Soon, half an hour later, over the canyon, one by one, the gods had arrived at the scene. Chapter 185. It might be better if you choose a way to die. At first, the gods didn't know why T had called them here, but when they saw Tony, everyone reacted. Suddenly, many people's faces changed. Tony's strength was not exaggerated, but was actually shown on the battlefield. Strictly speaking, the gods were witnesses of his battle with Malekith. So, after guessing why they were called here, many people looked at T with unfriendly eyes. T naturally had a vague sense of the god's attitude, but he didn't care. He just wanted to use Tony to unite these gods who were not in agreement. Otherwise, if he relied on himself alone, who knows how long it would take to establish enough prestige among the gods. After all, these guys were the kind of people who would not release their eagles until they saw the rabbit. Therefore, facing the unfriendly eyes of the gods, T completely ignored them, but stared at Tony tightly and pressed him further. Loki must die today. He has hunted down 3 gods, so he must not live. It must be said that Tyr is very wise. Tony saw at a glance that this guy was using this incident to divert the gods' attention and instantly united the gods. Sure enough, the gods who had just looked unfriendly became quiet after hearing this. This matter concerned the life and death of all of them, so even though many people saw through his intentions, they silently cooperated at this moment. Interesting, really interesting. Are all the gods here? Tony suddenly changed the topic. Because the topic jumped too quickly, T didn't even react to what Tony meant for a while, and couldn't help but answer subconsciously. Everyone who should come is here. After saying this, Tony nodded, and his tone became low and said, "That's good." Hearing this, the gods looked puzzled, and still didn't understand what Tony meant, but the next second, they understood. Tony's figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. When he appeared again, his right hand had already grabbed the neck of a god and slowly lifted him up. "Since everyone is here, we can start killing," Tony said in a deep voice, as if to explain what he had just said. At the same time, his right hand exerted a little force at this moment. The next second, there was a snapping sound, and the god whose neck he had pinched was directly broken alive. Seeing this scene, all the gods who witnessed this scene were stunned, and he was dumbfounded for a moment. The whole person instantly became excited. How could you kill him? You are breaking with the gods." Because of being too excited, his body trembled slightly. Seeing this, Tony's mouth corners slowly rose, his eyes swept over the gods, and finally fell on Tyr and said, "Thank you for all this. If it weren't for you, I would have to spend some effort to find them out. Good acting, but you don't have to act now," Tony said slowly, and for a moment the gods looked at T with a different look, and everyone thought he had harmed them. For a moment, the gods started to curse T. T was so angry that he was shaking all over. He opened his mouth to explain, but the gods didn't give him a chance to speak. However, the gods soon focused their attention on Tony. Compared with T, Tony was the biggest threat now. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Run." After that, the gods fled in all directions. They used their own speed to the extreme, and each chose a different direction. At this moment, they were all betting that Tony would not chase them. In this way, they had hope of escaping. As for confronting Tony, they gave up the idea from the beginning. Not to mention, whether they could match Tony together. Even if they could, they would definitely die a lot of people. Then the question is, who would be willing to use their own life to fulfill others? At least, everyone at the scene thought they were very smart, so they wouldn't do it. So when there are many smart people, everyone becomes a fool. Tony looked at this scene, and the corner of his mouth curled up. "Run. Can you run?" Muttering to himself, Tony's figure instantly disappeared from the spot. The next second, screams rang out, and a god's neck was instantly twisted. And this was just the beginning. Soon, a massacre took place. With the extreme speed, the escape of the gods was just a joke in Tony's eyes. They thought they could escape by separating, but they completely underestimated the speed difference between the two sides. Soon, screams rang out, and the gods fell from the sky like dumplings, and smashed into the canyon. T looked at this scene, trembling all over, and his face became extremely pale. "It's over. It's all over." T watched the massacre unfold with his own eyes, and he did not stop it, because he knew that soon, this would be his end. Even if he stopped it, it would only be the difference between dying early and late. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strong sense of regret. He should not have targeted Loki, should not have provoked Tony, and should not have gathered everyone, which led to Tony's capture. Unfortunately, it was too late. When things happened, even gods had no regrets. It was a long story, but it didn't take long. In just a few tens of seconds, none of the gods who fled were spared. They all fell in the canyon. Suddenly, only Tyr and his 5 men and Tony were left in the canyon. When Tony appeared in front of Tyr again, the 4 people behind T were so scared that their hands and feet were weak, and they could hardly move. "Okay, it's your turn," Tony said slowly with a smile. Suddenly, T showed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Everyone is responsible for their own actions. These plans were designed by me from beginning to end. Can you let them go?" T pointed to the only 4 gods who were still alive behind him. It's not that he was really righteous and selfless, but that only by saving them could T have hope of resurrection. Otherwise, everyone was dead, and who would help him revive? Following the principle of equivalent exchange, even if he could be resurrected, it would take a long time and a lot of materials. Therefore, if the 4 people behind him survived, he would still have a chance to be reborn. Unfortunately, Tony did not give him face in the face of his request, and even mocked him. I think it might be better for you to choose a way to die now. After saying this, although Tony did not directly refuse, everyone could hear the underlying meaning of his words. He would not help, so he had better give up the idea. Chapter 186, The Fall of the Gods. Ha ha. Panting sounds continued to sound, and he looked at Tony with sweat all over his forehead. Although Tony had not done anything yet, his refusal was like an invisible pressure, pressing hard on him, making his heart sink continuously. Even he was like this, not to mention the other people. At this moment, under the pressure of life and death, their performance was even worse than his. Seeing this scene, Tony also lost interest in playing. The smile on the corner of his mouth slowly converged, and his eyes gradually became cold. Realizing this, his heart skipped a beat, and then he couldn't help but shouting, "Do you really want to watch yourself go to death? When did we lose the courage to fight?" After saying that, a strong momentum suddenly rose from his body, and his face was full of determination. As a god of war, he would never sit there and wait for death. Even if he was going to die, he would tear a piece of flesh from Tony's body. Influenced by him, Vader and his companions were shocked, and the fear on their faces dissipated a little, replaced by a look of madness. It was not that his words really touched their hearts, but that he activated his ability as a god of war to boost the morale of his subordinates and suppress their fear. Kill. A loud shout rang out from Tyr and his companions, and they launched the final charge under Tyr's leadership. Looking at this scene, Tony's cold eyes flashed a trace of solemnity. For the creatures who dared to die, even if they were weak, he would not mock them. Of course, he would not show mercy. With a thought, gravity instantly fell on Tyr and his companions. The terrifying gravity descended, and the pace of the charge was suppressed. They were like carrying a mountain on their backs, and every step forward became extremely difficult. Seeing this, Tony's telekinesis suddenly turned into an invisible blade, whistling towards the few people. There were no surprises, no reversals. In front of absolute strength, the so-called explosion was nothing but a joke. Puff, puff, puff. One by one, the heads flew up, and blood spurted out from the necks of the gods. In just a moment, the last 5 gods were beheaded and died. For a moment, only Tony and Loki were left alive at the scene. In addition, there were corpses of gods all over the ground. As the gods' bodies fell, one shadow ninja after another walked out of the darkness and dragged their bodies into the Shadow Kingdom. Soon, all the bodies in the canyon disappeared completely, and they would eventually become the nutrients for the growth of the Shadow Core. After doing all this, Tony looked at Loki, and Loki happened to look at him with a complicated expression. "Why do you look like this? Are you sad about the fall of the gods?" Tony looked at Loki's expression and asked with a smile. Loki shook his head. "That's not the case. It's just that the gods are gone. It feels a little unreal." "Nothing is unreal. As long as you have the strength, you can change everything," Tony said slowly. Loki nodded in agreement, and then said a little depressed, "The gods are all dead. Then what should I do next? Of course, I will search for the fish that escaped the net. Although a lot of them were killed today, there should be some smart guys who escaped. Find them and get rid of them." "Understood." Loki nodded, and then said suspiciously, "I suddenly feel that you seem to be full of interest in hunting the gods." "Really? Maybe it feels good to trample them underfoot." Tony laughed and didn't tell the truth. After all, it's better for him to know about the matter of using the gods as nourishment. Otherwise, who knows if Loki will have any feelings of hurting his own kind. Without staying here for long, Tony slipped away after a few words, and Loki set out on the road to find the gods again. In the Shadow Kingdom, as the souls of the gods were devoured by the Shadow Kingdom, the entire Shadow world underwent drastic changes. Especially this time, Tony hunted down almost most of the gods in the god realm, which made the Shadow world eat a fat man in one breath. The strength of the world continued to increase, and the breath of darkness became deeper. Reflected on the Shadow Core, the strength of all the Shadow Core has been greatly enhanced. In the Asgard, Tony summoned a Shadow Soldier from each legion to test their strength. Under his test, the strength of the Shadow Core was soon revealed. The strength of a Shadow Ninja is comparable to Steve, and the strength of the Claw Shadow and Troll Core is not weaker than Banner. For a while, Tony couldn't help but take a breath of cold air, and there was only one thought in his mind. Send it. Countless stevs plus countless banners formed an immortal army. With such strength, who can resist? The Shadow Core, which had been unable to keep up with his strength, was completely woohoo, and took off after this wave of strengthening. With a smile on his face, Tony summoned a large number of Black Shadow ninjas, and handed them the materials for setting up the formation, asking them to set up the formation. The gods fell in large numbers, and Asgard's resistance was getting weaker and weaker. It was ready to devour Asgard. On the blue planet, Thor, who was heading towards the nursing home, suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. The blue sky suddenly turned into a fiery red, like a streamer of light that quickly crossed the sky and turned the sky into a fiery red. In the nursing home, Odin, who was lying in a rocking chair, looked at this scene, and the calmness on his face suddenly disappeared, replaced by a solemn look. In an unknown space, a young man in a yellow robe and a bald head instantly penetrated the space and looked at the changes happening on the blue planet. In addition to them, more and more people saw this rare vision that was rarely seen in 1,000 years. Most ordinary people didn't know what it meant, and many people even closed their eyes and made a wish excitedly, treating it as an ordinary meteor. However, people like Thor knew that this was not a meteor, but the twilight of the gods, a strange phenomenon that appeared in the world after a large number of gods fell. Blue Star was one of the 9 realms, so it would naturally be affected by the laws of the god realm. The more gods fell, the more magnificent the strange phenomenon would be. In the god realm, Atrium, Hela was bathed in blood rain, feeling the extreme sadness between heaven and earth, and a sense of sadness naturally rose in her heart. Have all the gods fallen? She murmured to herself, and a trace of inexplicable emotion flashed in her eyes. Chapter 187, The Unfathomable Man. The strange phenomenon on the blue star came and went quickly. Soon, the fiery red meteor disappeared in the sky, and Thor attracted his gaze. But his expression looked a little ugly. He didn't expect Tony to move so quickly. Not long after he returned to the blue star, the gods had already fallen. This made him completely panic, which was originally calm. At that moment, his pace could not help but speed up a lot, and he quickly came to the nursing home where Odin was recuperating. Ignoring the guard's obstruction, Thor broke in directly and found Odin lying in a rocking chair in the courtyard. "Father," Thor called softly. Odin didn't look back, and his body was still rocking with the rocking chair. Thor didn't get up either, and kept the posture of greeting. It was not until a long time later that a sigh sounded from Odin's mouth. "Did Hela do it?" "No." Huh. Odin stood up suddenly, then looked at Thor, and said in a deep voice, "What's going on?" He thought it was Hela who did it, but things seemed to be different from what he imagined. As the king of the gods, although he could not predict the future, he had a certain premonition about most things. It was because of this that he was easily exiled by Loki. Of course, it was more of a self-exile. It was because he felt that Hela was about to return and would bring a catastrophe to the god's domain that he made this choice. After all, Hela was also his daughter. Even a tiger would not eat its own cubs. He did not want to fight with Hela, so he simply turned a blind eye. This is why he has not returned to the god's domain. But now it seems that things are obviously different from what he expected. Looking at the surprised Odin, Thor did not keep him in suspense and quickly told all the things that happened, especially pointing out that Hela not only did not take action, but chose to cooperate with him. After listening, Odin was completely confused. Why didn't things go according to the script? What went wrong? He thought a little confused, but he knew that he couldn't watch the show anymore. If it was Hela who hunted the gods, it would be fine. After all, she was his daughter, and he could just pretend not to know. But if it was someone else, would they really think that he, the king of the gods, was fake? Tony. I didn't expect it to be him. Odin's tone seemed a little cold. Thor was a little embarrassed when he heard this. After all, he was the one who brought Tony to the god's realm. From the root, he was half responsible for the things in the god's realm this time. If it wasn't for him, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. Looking at Thor's expression, Odin saw the guilt in his heart at a glance. For an old guy like him, it was not difficult to see through Thor's thoughts. Don't blame yourself, this matter has nothing to do with you. Hearing this, Thor looked at Odin with some surprise. This was the first time he heard his father comforting him. The fact was that this was not Odin comforting him, but Odin really felt that way. Although he didn't know that things would turn out like this, he knew that even without Tony, Hela would act in this way, but Tony's appearance disrupted the progress of this matter. Moreover, this result was easier for him to accept than Hela's action. After all, Hela was his daughter, and Tony was not. He didn't know what to do when facing his own daughter, but when facing Tony, revenge was all. From this point of view, he should thank that guy. So you came here this time to ask me to go back and take charge of the situation? Yes, father. Okay, I agree, let's go. After saying that, Thor's mouth twitched. He found that things were not going as he expected at all, and he had been prepared to be rejected. After all, he had been rejected last time, but Odin actually agreed without waiting for him to speak, which made him feel like punching cotton. Fortunately, his goal was achieved, so Thor nodded immediately, and the father and son left the nursing home and began to return to the god's domain. While Thor was persuading Odin, the god's domain, the atrium, and Hela's pace of attack still did not stop. Her body was gone. Although she was in a soul state, her strength was not much weaker than her heyday, but there was still a gap after all. So, she was collecting flesh and blood to help her rebuild her body. However, because of the shadow devouring group, she did not encounter any resistance along the way. Even when she arrived at the city, the shadow devouring group had devoured the shadows of the entire population in the city, leaving her with a lot of flesh and blood, so her attack speed was naturally fast. So far, most of the population of the god's domain has fallen into her hands. Zingai Plain, a plain area outside the Zangting heavy city. The undead army was stationed here and dug a huge pit in Zingai Plain, enough for 10 square kilometers. The large amount of flesh and blood collected during this period was now thrown into this huge pit. For a time, the pit was filled with blood, and the smell of blood was unbearable. The captain and others looked at this scene with reluctance, but they also knew the seriousness of the matter, so they did not stop it. In addition, those who were caught had died before they were caught, so they had no guilt, so they did not stop this crazy scene. When the pit was filled with blood, Hela, in the state of soul, ordered the army of undead to garrison around it, and she stepped in. She wanted to rebuild her body, and now that the flesh and blood had been collected, it was time to start. Stepping into the blood pool step by step, Hela's figure was quickly submerged in the blood pool, and soon, a wave rippled in the blood pool. As time passed, the movement in the blood pool became louder and louder, and soon a storm was set off. At this moment, a cave suddenly appeared in the center of the blood pool. The cave was like a black hole in the universe, and began to swallow a lot of blood. For a while, the blood in the blood pool began to flow to the center of the blood pool. After entering the black hole, the blood continued to decrease, as if it was swallowed by something. Half an hour, the blood became less and less, and the speed of flowing away became faster and faster. Everyone could even see the scene at the bottom of the blood pool. Finally, after another hour, the blood pool completely disappeared, and in its place was Hela sitting cross-legged in the center of the blood pool. Unlike the previous illusion, her body was now solid and full of substance. It was obvious that she had rebuilt her body. Seeing this scene, the captain and others breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what, it was a good thing for them that Hela could recover. They even wished that Hela's strength would be as strong as possible. After all, they had to deal with Tony, that unfathomable man. Chapter 188 Bor, father of Odin. Soon, a fierce aura emanated from Hela's body, which was even more terrifying than the aura before her physical body was destroyed. For a moment, the captain and others felt a heavy pressure, and their faces changed. At this moment, Hela opened her eyes, and 2 rays of divine light emanated from her eyes, directly piercing the space. Feeling the powerful force surging in her body, Hela smiled immediately. As the saying goes, there is no construction without destruction. As the goddess of death, after experiencing death, her strength is stronger than before, and it can even be said to have increased significantly. After all, she can only bear the title of the goddess of death after experiencing death. With a flash of her figure, Hela walked out of the center of the blood pool and appeared in front of the captain and several others. Looking at Hela, the captain quickly said, "Miss Hela, you have recovered now." Do we still want to continue the conquest? Hearing the captain's question, Hela shook her head directly. Before she fought with Tony, she still wanted to rule the 9 realms for fun, but after fighting with Tony, she had completely lost interest in the 9 realms. If it wasn't for gathering blood and flesh to restore her body, she wouldn't even bother to attack the atrium. Now that she no longer needs blood and flesh, she naturally won't do such a thing again. You guys should rest for a while and stay the same. I'm going to leave for a while. Ms. Hela, where are you going? Susan asked curiously. After she finished speaking, she realized that she seemed to have said the wrong thing. How could she find out the whereabouts of such a big man? She was so scared that she quickly covered her mouth. Fortunately, Hela, who was in a good mood, didn't care and even explained it. Although I have recovered and my strength has improved compared to before, I still can't deal with Tony, so I'm going to find a helper. Hearing this, the captain and several others nodded repeatedly. And Hela didn't stay for too long and soon disappeared in the army. The God's Tomb Cemetery is the burial place of the gods and the destination of all gods. Some creatures whose lifespans have come to the end or died in accidents are all buried here. Although the lifespan of gods is very long, unless they are immortal, all gods will fall one day. When Hela came to the God's Tomb Cemetery, tombstones suddenly appeared in front of her. Looking around, there were no less than 1,000. These are not ordinary gods. Those who can be buried here are all gods of the divine realm, such as the god of light. However, Hela was not very interested in these dead people. She just took a look and retracted her gaze. Her figure also landed in front of a small wooden house at the entrance of the God's Tomb Cemetery. Knock, knock, knock. Hela politely stepped forward and knocked on the door. If Thor and others saw such a scene, they would probably be stunned in an instant. After all, Hela has always given them the impression of being lawless. She would not even give Odin face, let alone knocking on the door so properly. According to her temperament, shouldn't she kick the door open? Unfortunately, no one knows this scene. Soon, the door was opened, and with a creaking sound, an old man appeared in front of Hela. The old man's hair had turned snow white, and he was about 1.6 meters tall, which made him look a little short, but what caught people's attention was the muscles on his body, each of which seemed to be chiseled with a knife and axe, full of strength. Looking at Hela, the old man showed a kind smile on his face. It turned out to be little Hela. Why are you here again so soon? The old man asked curiously. Hearing this, Hela's face couldn't help but become a little ruddy. The old man's name is Bol. This name is unfamiliar to most people, but if you talk about his other identity, I'm afraid no one doesn't know it. Odin's father. That's right, this kind looking old man is Odin's father, Hela's grandfather. It was an accident that he met Hela. After being released, Hela came to the God's Tomb Cemetery as soon as possible in order to gather some men, hoping to revive the bodies of those gods and help him conquer the god's domain. But she didn't expect that Bol would actually be guarding the tomb, so Hela was taught a lesson. In the end, it was Bol who took the initiative to bring it up, and Hela knew his identity. Last time, she proposed to cooperate with Tony in order to deal with this old man. It can be said that, if things had not changed, she and Bol should be in hostility. But things did not go as she wished. She didn't expect that she would actually face Tony, and she couldn't beat him. So, in order to win Tony, Hela could only ask Bol for help again. Without beating around the bush or dragging it out, Hela went straight to the point and said, I'm here to ask you for help. Hela suppressed the panic in her tone. After all, she had used medicine to deal with him before, and now she came to ask for help again. Even with her personality, she felt a little embarrassed. So, there is no such thing as courtesy. She just wants to know the result quickly. It would be good if she could get reinforcement, but it doesn't matter if she can't. Anyway, there is Odin to back her up. And listening to Hela's words, Bol's eyes flashed with curiosity. What happened? Is there anything you can't handle? He still knew Hela's strength. It can be said that she was almost at the top of the god's domain. Except for Odin, no one in the god's domain should be her opponent. Why would she come to him for help? As for the fall of the gods, Bol is still unclear. After all, although the God's Tomb Cemetery relies on Asgard, it is actually a subspace. The vision of the fall of the gods cannot be transmitted here at all. Facing Bol's inquiry, Hela couldn't help but take a deep breath and finally chose to tell the truth. Not only did she talk about the fall of the gods, but also about how Tony blew up her body. After listening to her words, Bol's eyes became dangerous. The kind old man just now disappeared in an instant and was replaced by an old man with a powerful aura. How can Odin be the king of the gods when such a thing happened? Don't be angry, little Hela, just wait. I will go out with you and help you get revenge and beat Odin severely. By the way, he can't fulfill his duty to protect the realm of the gods, and he can't fulfill his duty to protect his daughter. He is a waste. Bol shouted loudly, and Hela felt a warm current in her heart when she heard this. She could feel that everything Bol said was true, and he didn't say it to comfort him or win her over. This made her heart, which had been sealed for many years, surge with warmth, and the corners of her mouth could not help but curl up slightly, revealing a smile. Then you must keep your word and help me get revenge. No problem. Bol waved his hand and agreed directly. Chapter 189. The old man who refuses to die is a thief. Time flies. 3 days passed in a flash, and after agreeing to Hela, Bol followed Hela to leave the god's tomb cemetery. And Hela also knew for the first time how nagging this old man was. Simply put, Bol was a chatterbox. I don't know if it was because he stayed in the god's tomb cemetery for too long. Since leaving the god's tomb cemetery, his mouth has been like a machine gun, and it has never stopped. This made Hela feel regretful from time to time. If she had known that this old man was so long-winded, she would never ask him for help. Unfortunately, there is no regret medicine in the world. Now that things have come to this, she can only try her best to endure it. Fortunately, she finally waited for reinforcement on this day. Thor brought Odin back to the god's realm and reunited with her. As the saying goes, father and son are enemies in the previous life, and this is true for Odin and Bol. As soon as they met, the two old men quarreled, and Bol accused Odin of not being a good leader or a good father. In short, he scolded Odin. In this regard, Odin was not to be outdone, accusing Bol of leaving a lot of mess for him to clean up, and now he had the nerve to accuse him. The two old men quarreled with each other, and no one could tell from their appearance that they were father and son. Those who didn't know would think they were mortal enemies. Thor swallowed his saliva dryly and said cautiously, "Should we do something about it? Or let them quarrel like this?" Hearing this, Hela glanced at him, rolled her eyelids and said, "How to do it? Will these two guys listen to you?" After this, Thor was stunned and then smiled awkwardly. He was still very self-aware and knew that his words were useless. He immediately flattered, "Don't you still have your elder sister? They will definitely listen to you. Why don't you persuade them? After all, business is more important," Thor said in a flattering way. After he finished speaking, Hela was stunned and looked at Thor with a strange look, which made him feel goosebumps all over. "Is there anything wrong?" Thor shrank his head and looked a little cowardly. Hearing this, Hela shook her head and said nothing, but she couldn't help but murmur in her heart, "Big sister? It seems that having a younger brother is not bad." Thinking of this, Hela turned her head to look at the two old men who were still bickering, and shouted coldly, "Enough, I'm not here to listen to you quarreling. If you want to quarrel, then go away and quarrel." Hela was angry, and Odin and Bol shut up at the same time. One of them was Hela's grandfather, and the other was Hela's father. They were full of guilt towards Hela, so Hela spoke and directly suppressed the two. This made Thor, who was standing aside, tremble with anger. It's the 21st century. When can we boys stand up? Ahem. Bol coughed lightly and smiled again on his face and said, "Don't quarrel anymore. You make a plan. I, the old man, will follow the arrangement and do whatever you tell me to do," Bol said with a kind face, but Hela ignored him. After these few days of contact, she almost figured out Bol's character. He was just an old child. If you ignore him, he can be quiet for a while. If you start talking to him, he will definitely chat with you for days and nights. As for Odin, Hela completely ignored this person from the beginning. How could she say that she didn't have any resentment in her heart after being sealed for thousands of years? It was just that she was under pressure from Tony, so she could only choose to turn a blind eye. Therefore, from the beginning, she didn't say a word to Odin and completely ignored Odin. Odin was obviously aware of this, so he didn't say anything. He stood aside obediently like a transparent man, without any sense of existence, let alone the demeanor of the king of the gods. Thor, I leave it to you. You can arrange it. If you need me to take action, just tell me directly. Hela said to Thor, and then walked to the side and closed her eyes to rest. Seeing that everyone's eyes fell on him as Hela delegated power, Thor suddenly felt a burst of pressure. If he hadn't grown a lot during this period, he might not be able to bear this pressure. In that case, let me talk about it. The forces we can gather are basically all here. I always feel that, as long as we are strong enough, nothing can stop us. So, there is no need for a specific plan. Let's go find Tony now. If we defeat him, we will win. Thor said righteously, but his heart was full of helplessness. He also wanted to make a complete plan and go through it in 1, 2, and 3 steps. However, Tony and Loki were only 2 people in total. If they defeated them, they would win. This could only depend on the hard power of both sides. There was no good plan at all. Therefore, even if he wanted to show his wisdom, he had no way to do it. Fortunately, everyone was very respectful and nodded seriously without disrupting the show. This was also a kind of comfort. Seeing everyone nodding, Hela, who had closed her eyes, suddenly opened her eyes. It seems that you all agree with Thor's plan. In this case, let's do it without further delay. After speaking, Hela flashed and took the lead to fly towards Asgard. Thor and his men were not to be outdone. They followed one after another, and no one fell behind. Odin and Bol fell behind the team. Looking at Hela, the leader, Bol's eyes flashed with a smile, and then he turned to look at Odin and said, "This girl is not bad. What did you think at the beginning? You actually sealed her in hell." Listening to his old father's words, Odin sighed helplessly. "I can only say that fate is playing tricks on me. It's not what I want for things to become like this." After speaking, Bol curled his lips. "Don't joke with your old man. This girl is not bad. After this matter is over, she will still be under my protection. You'd better not make trouble for her," Bol said seriously, and Odin's mouth corner immediately raised a bitter smile. "How could it be? She is my daughter after all. How could I embarrass her? Besides, I don't have much time left. The world will belong to them in the future. Even if I want to make trouble, I will be powerless." Odin's words were very plain, but the information revealed was enough to cause an earthquake in the gods' domain. The dignified king of the gods is actually going to die. It's incredible to think about it. Bol, on the other hand, looked at him carefully, his eyes gleaming with divine light, almost seeing through him completely. Then he withdrew his gaze and said in a faint voice, "An old man who refuses to die is a thief. It's time for you to give way to the young, and then come with me to guard the cemetery." "Yes, father," Odin said solemnly, completely unable to see the red face from the quarrel with Bol just now. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, The Blessing of the World's Will. Asgard. When a group of people came here, a sense of desolation suddenly hit them. Although the incident in Asgard was not long ago, after losing popularity, in just a few days, the huge palace became a bit spooky. Of course, this was also due to Hela. When she broke free from the seal, she released a lot of death here, so she was one of the culprits, but no one pursued it. In the crowd, Odin and Thor walked out slowly at this moment. If you say who knows Asgard best, it must be the two of them. For Thor, this is where he grew up, and for Odin, this is his territory. Therefore, watching Asgard become a dead place, the two people's minds are also the most complicated. In contrast, Hela and others have no feelings about Asgard becoming like this. Even as the goddess of death, Hela likes Asgard more at this moment, which is suitable for her capital. Fortunately, both parties still remember the purpose of this trip. Whether it is looking forward or reminiscing, they must first deal with Tony, the current master of Asgard. At that moment, without waiting for others to make any move, Thor took the initiative to fly up, his figure suspended above the sky, his eyes fixed on the palace complex of Asgard, and he used his divine power to shout, "Tony, come out." A loud voice spread out from his mouth, forming a series of sound waves, rolling towards the Asgard. Suddenly, Tony, who was sitting cross-legged in a palace of Asgard, opened his eyes. A divine light flashed in his eyes, and Tony looked up through the obstacles in the direction of Thor and his group. His eyes penetrated all the buildings, and took Hela and others into his eyes. "Are you finally here? I just don't know if you are ready." As he spoke, Tony's mouth corners rose, revealing a smile. At the same time, he was also curious in his heart. If the Shadow Kingdom swallowed Odin and others, what level would the Shadow Core be able to improve to? In this regard, Tony roughly calculated it in his mind, but he didn't have any clear concept. But there was one thing he could be sure of: it would never be less than the benefits of swallowing the gods. After all, whether it is Odin or Hela, plus a legendary bowl, these people are all far superior to the gods. If the gods rely on quantity, then they rely on quality. Which one is more important, quantity or quality, is a question that everyone has their own opinions. Tony slowly stood up and walked towards the outside. The palace gate moved without wind and opened automatically. Tony slowly stepped out, and then the whole person stepped onto the sky step by step like a ladder to heaven. Soon, Hela and others saw Tony approaching quickly in the sky. Suddenly, everyone's eyes were focused on Tony, and all kinds of expressions flashed in their eyes, including resentment, complexity, indifference, and appreciation. "Tony, you finally dared to come out." Thor stepped forward and said righteously. After listening, Tony's mouth curled up. "I have always been here, but you only dared to come now. Why? Are you ready and so confident that you can deal with me?" Tony's words were full of ridicule, and Thor was speechless with just one sentence. In front of Tony, he can be regarded as a person who has no eloquence and no strength. In short, he felt aggrieved. However, after being hit for so long, Thor had long been accustomed to it. He took a deep breath and said, "Stop talking nonsense. You are cruel and brutal, hunting gods, and even wanting to plot against Asgard. You are simply committing a heinous crime. I advise you to surrender obediently, otherwise don't blame us for being rude." Thor shouted loudly, as if he was judging Tony, while Tony stared at Thor without saying a word, his eyes flickering slightly. He had always been curious before why the protagonists always talked nonsense at the last moment. Now he has found the answer vaguely. Just as Thor pronounced his own crime and made a judgment, his aura became stronger, and the aura of Hela and others who were apt behind him also increased a little. They seemed to be unaware of all this, and only Tony caught this change because he had been staring at them. At this moment, many guesses flashed through Tony's mind, forming a reasonable speculation. Although the world does not have specific wisdom, it is similar to the existence of will. It usually acts according to specific rules, but once a threat is detected, it will activate the self-rescue mechanism, such as the appearance of the protagonist who saves the world in the movie. Now, Thor is the protagonist who saves the world, and Tony bears the responsibility of the villain. Therefore, when Thor is talking, the will of the world pays attention and helps them to cheat, so that he can kill the big boss. This guess is nonsensical. It is impossible for ordinary people to believe it. However, for a time traveler, there is nothing that cannot be believed. Because time travel is the biggest paradox. Since even he exists, the will of the world he guessed may also exist. He even realized that he brought a great threat to it, so he planned to kill himself with the help of Thor and others. After thinking about all this, Tony's face suddenly showed a playful smile. It is getting more and more interesting. Did the will of the world come down personally? Thinking silently in his heart, Tony was not panicked at all, and even wanted to laugh. With an immortal body, he had the confidence to deal with everything. Are you done? Is there anything else you want to add? If not, I'm going to do it. Tony folded his hands and said slowly, as if he didn't take them seriously at all. And his reaction also made Thor a little confused. He didn't know how to answer. Why didn't this guy play by the rules? Shouldn't you get angry and refute loudly? This is how the movies he watched on Blue Star were played. Thor opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but before he could speak, Odin walked past him and interrupted him. Do it. After the words fell, everyone's expression was stern, and then they all showed solemnity. Seeing this, Tony waved his hand, and suddenly, a large area of shadows gathered, and the shadow devouring group officially appeared. One after another, more than 10 meters high devouring shadows appeared in front of everyone. They were huge in size, and there were at least 100 of them blocking Tony. If they wanted to attack Tony, they had to deal with the devouring shadows first. In the crowd, the captain, who had been silent all the time, suddenly showed an angry expression on his face as the devouring shadows appeared. "It's you who massacred the entire atrium. You are so cruel," he shouted angrily. Although he had guessed it before, he was completely sure, until he saw it with his own eyes. Chapter 191. To kill someone, you must first destroy their heart. The captain's angry voice rang out, and Banner and others also reacted. It was this man who slaughtered countless people in the atrium, turning the atrium into a dead zone. Hearing this, Tony smiled. He did not deny it, but nodded generously, and then a playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth and said, "It's true that I did it, but weren't you happy when you devoured the flesh and blood? If it weren't for me, Hela wouldn't have recovered her body so quickly. So, what qualifications do you have to blame me? I asked for their shadows, and you stole their flesh and blood. Everyone just took what they needed." Tony refuted calmly, and his words changed the faces of the captain and others. The captain, who had a firm face, showed a rare confusion on his face. "Yes, what is the difference between me and Tony? Although it was not him who devoured the flesh and blood of those people, I contributed a lot in it. What is the difference between me and an accomplice?" Seeing the captain being influenced by Tony, Thor on the side immediately became anxious and quickly retorted, "Nonsense. You killed those people, we are just making use of the waste." At this point, Thor paused and realized that his words were a bit unpleasant. However, his meaning was very clear. "Oh, really? What if I tell you that those people can still come back to life? As long as you kill Shadow Eater, all those with intact bodies can come back to life." Tony said lightly, but his words were like a bomb to the captain and others, exploding directly in their minds. Everyone looked at Tony in shock, wanting to confirm the truth of his words. Tony shrugged and continued, "Don't look at me with that suspicious look. I don't need to lie to you. So it was you who slaughtered everyone in the atrium, not me. The beliefs of people are different. The captain and others have always believed that they are doing the right thing, so no matter what difficulties they face, they can face them head on." However, as soon as Tony said this, their faith was shaken. They actually slaughtered the entire atrium with their own hands. Although they wanted to tell themselves that what Tony said was all false, and it was all his conspiracy, their intuition told them that what Tony said was true. This was also related to Tony's performance all along. He simply disdained to lie. For a time, the captain and Banner's faces became particularly ugly. Their beliefs were shaken. To use an Eastern idiom, this is killing people and destroying their hearts. Thor, who was on the side, saw the changes in their expressions and was anxious. At the moment of the war, they had problems on their side. It was not a good sign. But he had no way to enlighten them, because he didn't know how to refute Tony. Fortunately, the leader of this action was not them, but Odin and his men. Looking at the affected captains and others, Odin shook his head helplessly, and then turned his eyes to Tony. "It seems that I still underestimated you. Compared with you, they still seem a little immature," Odin said in a calm tone, not affected by Tony's words at all. Tony was not surprised by this. Compared with the captains, Odin, an old monster who has lived for a long time, has long been indifferent to things. Not to mention that he did not participate in this matter. Even if he personally slaughtered everyone in the atrium, he would not be affected by Tony's words at this moment. This is a difference in mentality and has nothing to do with strength. "Thank you for the compliment, but since you have left the god's realm, why do you want to come back? Can't you spend the rest of your time in peace and stability? And the gentleman next to you, I guess he doesn't have much time left. Why bother to get involved in this matter?" Tony looked at Odin and Bol curiously. After saying that, Bol smiled. "I'm tired of living, old man. I have to leave in a more exciting way before I leave." At the side, Odin also said calmly at this moment, "After all, this is my kingdom. I have to do something." Besides, I have lived long enough and have seen everything. If I can take you on the road, then the road will not be lonely. I understand. Tony nodded. Then let's see the truth with our hands. After saying that, a divine light suddenly bloomed in Tony's eyes, and suddenly, two lasers whistled towards Odin and Bol. Watching this scene, Odin and Bol's respective weapons appeared in their hands at the same time. The Eternal Spear and the God-killing Battle Axe. The spear light and the axe light fell at the same time, and collided fiercely with Tony's attack, and immediately set off a violent explosion. Boom. 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 The terrifying power fluctuations swept around, and the shockwave made Thor and others' expressions constantly change, and their bodies began to retreat subconsciously. Except for Hela, no one could bear the aftermath of the fight between the three, which meant that they were not even qualified to participate in this battle. Hela looked at the people who had taken action, and snorted coldly, "This time, I won't lose again." After that, Hela exuded a strong breath of death, and rushed directly into the battlefield, teaming up with Odin and the other two to form a 3-on-1 situation. Looking at this scene, Thor and his men did not intend to watch the show. Although they could not deal with Tony, they set their sights on the Shadow Devourers. Especially the captain and his men. They still remembered what Tony said just now, that if the Shadow Devourers were killed, those with intact bodies would be able to come back to life. Although, in order to help Hela recover her body, they threw a large number of people into the blood pool, but many people's bodies were still intact. Therefore, whether it was for atonement, or for justice in their hearts, they had to deal with the Shadow Devourers. At this moment, several people joined forces, and rushed directly to the Shadow Devourers. At this moment, the Shadow Devourers also roared and came up, and started a bloody battle with the captain and his men. Strong explosions sounded continuously, and the battlefield was consciously divided into two parts by everyone. One part was naturally the battlefield, where Tony was fighting against Odin and others alone. The other part was the battlefield where the captain and others fought against the shadow devouring group. The two sides tacitly did not interfere with each other, and each dealt with their own opponents. At this moment, the situation on the battlefield was extremely unfriendly to Tony. Although his strength was strengthened after the fusion of the Tiger spell, neither Odin nor Bol was his opponent in a one-on-one fight, but under the joint efforts of the three, Tony still felt great pressure. After all, these people are top powerhouses, and Tony's strength has not changed qualitatively. Therefore, even if Tony is stronger than them, his strength is limited. Now under the joint siege of the three, it looks a bit precarious. Chapter 192, not very harmful but extremely insulting. Just when Tony's situation became more and more dangerous, Tony's speed suddenly increased a lot, and he directly escaped from the encirclement of the three people. This sudden scene changed the expressions of Hela and the other two, and even stopped their offensive temporarily, because they suddenly found that they could not limit Tony's speed, nor could they keep up with his speed. Several people were very experienced in combat, and knew very well what this meant. This meant that, even if Tony could not beat them, he could leave the battlefield at any time, and stay or leave at will. In this way, Tony completely took the initiative in the battle. Therefore, several people did not continue to encircle and suppress, but exchanged glances with each other, thinking about how to limit Tony's speed. Looking at the three people who were communicating with their eyes, Tony's face suddenly showed a smile. "Why, do you think I will run away? Don't worry, I won't leave until I solve you. Today, it is destined that only one of us can stand." Tony told the truth, but it was obvious that Hela and the other three did not believe him, and the eyes of several people were still communicating. Tony didn't mind this, but an invisible force suddenly emanated from him. This is the power of gravity. As gravity exploded and fell on the three people, Hela and the other two suddenly felt that their bodies were out of control and lost control in an instant. However, the three people with rich combat experience were not panicked at all. Even in the moment of exchanging glances just now, they had completed the communication. Odin threw out the Eternal Spear in his hand in an instant, and the Eternal Spear immediately emitted endless light and whistled towards Tony. At the same time, Bull also shouted at this moment, and the terrifying divine power burst out from his body, breaking free from the shackles of gravity for a short time, and then the battle axe in his hand fell directly towards Tony's vitals, blocking his retreat. In conjunction with the attack of the Eternal Spear, no matter what Tony chooses, he must face one. Looking at this scene, Tony's eyes were full of calmness. Without dodging or escaping, Tony punched out and met the Eternal Spear. Compared with Bull's attack, the Eternal Spear without anyone controlling it was obviously easier to deal with. The tip of the spear and the fist collided fiercely, and a sound of metal collision suddenly exploded. Clang! Tony's figure trembled, and a terrifying force burst out from his body, and the power of the Bull spell was mobilized to the extreme. Suddenly, the Spear of Eternity was directly blasted out by Tony. But just when Tony was about to retract his fist, he suddenly found that his body seemed unable to move. It was as if he was hit by the legendary immobilization spell. With only one breath, he could break through this bondage, but this was the opportunity that Odin and others had been waiting for a long time. Hela, who had not made any moves before, appeared directly in front of Tony and grabbed him. Her speed was extremely fast. Before a breath had passed, her palm fell on Tony's chest. The next second, a terrifying force of death broke out and invaded his body crazily. As the goddess of death, Hela can easily take the lives of all creatures in Asgard. Although Tony is not a creature of Asgard, as long as the power of death is used to destroy all life in his body, the same effect can be achieved. For a moment, the two of them froze in midair, and Hela desperately input the power of death, intending to destroy all life in Tony's body. But at this moment, the power of the horse charm was activated, dispelling all external forces. At this moment, a strong life energy emerged from Tony's body and collided with Hela's death power. The two sides used Tony's body as a battlefield and started a competition. Feeling the vast life energy in Tony's body, Hela's expression suddenly changed, and she immediately increased the output of the power of death. But no matter how hard she tried, the death power input into Tony's body was curbed by the rich life energy and could not go further. Tony felt the changes in his body. Although his body could not move temporarily due to the collision of the two forces, he was not panicked and even showed a smile on his face. It seems that your death power can't do anything to me. Hearing this, Hela looked up and glared at Tony, then gritted her teeth and continued to input the power of death. As a large amount of death power invaded, the horse charm in Tony's body seemed to be stimulated and suddenly burst out with more intense life energy, which even Tony himself could not control. Because unlike other abilities, the horse charm is more like a passive ability, and it will be activated automatically when Tony is hurt. Suffering from the strong impact of life energy, Hela finally couldn't resist it and said without turning back, "Hurry up and find a way, I can't deal with this guy." Hearing this, Odin and Bull quickly stepped forward. The two looked at the pale Hela and then at Tony, who looked indifferent. At that moment, Bull shouted, "Let me do it." As he said, he raised his battle axe and chopped it towards Tony's head. Puff! As expected, Bull's axe sank directly into Tony's head. For a moment, Tony had a huge axe on his head, and the scene was terrifying. But, a scene that shocked the three people happened. Under such a strong attack, Tony not only did not yell, but even a hint of sarcasm appeared in his eyes, as if to say, "Didn't you eat?" Seeing this, as the saying goes, uncle can tolerate, aunt can't. Bull shouted, pulled the battle axe out of Tony's head, and stabbed it horizontally into Tony's neck. Blood stained the axe blade, and Tony was almost beheaded, but he still had a smile on his lips. "Is that all you can do?" A simple sentence, not very harmful, but extremely insulting. Bull's face suddenly turned red with anger. Even Odin on the side couldn't stand it anymore. Holding the Eternal Spear in his hand, stabbed Tony's heart with a shot. Puff! The tip of the spear sank into Tony's chest and went straight through his body. His heart exploded completely at this moment. This fatal injury, let alone mortals, even gods would be dead. Unfortunately, Tony is still alive. Although he looks miserable, he is still alive and kicking. Even the head that was split open just now has completely recovered to its original state, and there is no trace of wound. If their weapons were not still in Tony's body, Odin and Bull couldn't help but wonder if the scene just now was an illusion. But even if it was not an illusion, who can explain to them what is wrong with this guy? Is he really still a human? Odin and the other two were confused, and Tony's voice sounded at this moment. It seems that you have used up all your means. It's my turn now. Chapter 193 I choose to die of old age. Tony's voice was neither light nor heavy, but it made several people feel cold at this moment. Odin's face changed drastically at this moment and he said, "Back off." While speaking, he quickly pulled back, at an extremely fast speed. Similarly, Bull and Hela reacted quickly and quickly distanced themselves from Tony. However, just when Bull was about to get away from Tony, suddenly, a hand grabbed his battle axe. Looking up, he saw Tony looking at him calmly. His eyes seemed to contain a universe, deep and mysterious, enough to make people fall in love with them at a glance. When Bull met his eyes, a trace of confusion suddenly appeared in his eyes, obviously affected by Tony, so his body could not help but pause. Behind him, Odin saw this scene and suddenly shouted, "Father!" His voice woke Bull instantly, but it was too late at this moment. Tony's hands were burning with flames, and the flames spread along the battle axe towards Bull. The confused Bull had no time to react. When he woke up, the flames had spread along the battle axe to his hands. Bull groaned in intense pain. Tony's flames were not ordinary fire, but the rules of fire, which Bull could not bear at all. Seeing that he was about to be engulfed by the flames, at this moment, Bull's eyes flashed with a trace of cruelty, and the next second, his arms were directly broken from his shoulders. He also took the opportunity to withdraw. The next second, his broken arms turned directly into ashes, and even his battle axe turned into a pool of molten iron. Seeing this, Bull couldn't help but take a breath of cold air, and a fear rose in his heart. Almost, just a little bit, he would be gone. It can be imagined that once the flames spread to his whole body, he would be completely in hell. At this moment, Odin and Hela also looked at Tony with a solemn face, and a trace of heaviness flashed in their eyes. They were originally full of confidence, but now they suddenly lost the confidence to fight Tony. Under the gaze of several people, Tony's wounds healed rapidly. The injuries left by several people on him were completely recovered in less than a few breaths. After moving his head, Tony made a crisp sound in his body, and then looked at the few people with a smile on his face. The means are not weak. If I hadn't been more skilled, I would have really fallen into your trap. However, it's still a little short. Tell me, how do you want to die? Hearing this, Odin glanced at Hela, and then coughed lightly. Old death. As soon as these words came out, the originally serious atmosphere relaxed inexplicably. Not to mention Tony, even Hela couldn't help rolling her eyes. Tony looked at Odin with a strange face. What did this old man learn on Blue Star? His mind was full of nonsensical ideas, but since he was chosen by others, Tony naturally had to meet his requirements. At this moment, gravity started again, restraining the actions of several people, and then the mental power burst out immediately afterwards, rushing towards the minds of several people, leaving them no time to think about anything else. At the same time, in the void around the few people, burning flames suddenly appeared, blocking the retreat of Odin and the others. The next second, a dark red gem appeared in front of Tony. It was none other than the reality gem. Since you want to die of old age, then I will grant you your wish. Aging. As soon as the words fell, the three people who were originally resisting Tony's mental attack suddenly felt a terrifying force coming from the dark. With the inexplicable power added to their bodies quickly aged. In a short moment, the three people felt as if they had lived for tens of millions of years. Their skin became wrinkled, their flesh became rotten, and a breath of aging suddenly emanated from the three people. Similarly, Tony's body also showed a breath of aging at this moment, but the difference was that the breath of aging on Tony's body quickly dissipated, and his body did not change at all. The ability of the reality gem to modify reality naturally has to bear a huge price if you want to use it. After all, the universe also follows the law of conservation of energy. The more powerful the treasure, the more restrictions there are. Tony cursed the three people to age, and similarly, he had to pay the price of aging in exchange. Even because the three people's strength is at the same level as Tony, when Tony cursed the three people to age at the same time, he himself almost had to endure 3 times the aging. If it were Malekith who used this ability, it would almost be a mutual destruction. Unfortunately, Tony got stuck with a bug. He was immortal with the dog charm, so such a backlash was useless. Therefore, Odin and the others became old, but Tony was fine. Feeling the changes in themselves, the expressions on Odin and the other two's faces changed at the same time, and Hela's reaction was the most exaggerated. Looking at her old skin, a scream suddenly broke out from her mouth. Although she was a god, she was also a woman, and aging, for women, was completely like a natural enemy. So after discovering her own changes, Hela could hardly accept it. "Arsehole, change back to me," Hela said angrily. Tony glanced at him, and then ignored him, but looked at Odin and the other two and smiled. "You two's time is up. Do you have anything else to say?" Tony asked with a smile. After enduring aging, Hela became old but still alive. Odin and Bol were at the end of their lives. After all, they didn't have much time left, and Tony's aging made them finish their remaining lives in an instant. Hearing this, Odin sighed. He didn't panic like most people facing life and death, but calmed down completely. "I underestimated you. Let's talk about this. I want to discuss a deal with you, you say?" Tony nodded. He was a little curious about what Odin wanted to talk about. Release Hela and the others. "Oh, what can I get?" "The eternal spear and our souls." Odin pointed at himself and Bol. Bol didn't say anything, as if he was leaving it to Odin to decide. "The eternal spear will be my trophy when you die. As for your two souls, they will also be mine when you die. You are using something that will soon belong to me to make a deal. This is not good," Tony said slowly, without any intention of agreeing. After hearing his words, Odin showed a confident smile on his face. "I admit that I'm not as good as you, but if you think you can get my soul easily, you're just overthinking it. If I don't want to, you'll get nothing in the end even if you die. You can try." Looking at Odin with a confident look on his face, Tony frowned. Chapter 194. When a man is about to die, his words are good. Tony never looked down on people. He knew very well why he could get to where he is today. It was not because he was smart, but because of his own efforts and a little help from the system. Therefore, facing Odin's threat, Tony suddenly became a little uncertain. He was not sure whether the souls of these two guys would be captured as easily as the gods after they died. If they really had a trick to make their souls disappear or annihilate, then he would lose a lot. After all, the souls of the gods made the Shadow Kingdom so much stronger, not to mention the two high-quality souls of Odin and Bol. When added together, they were not necessarily worse than the gods. So, after thinking for a long time, Tony rarely continued to be tough, and took a step back and said, "Okay, in this case, I will give them a chance. As long as I get your souls and the Spear of Eternity, I will forgive this incident and let them leave the divine domain." Hearing this, Odin nodded, then glanced at Hela, who was a little absent-minded, and said again, "Help her recover. I believe you can do it." Hearing this, Tony nodded, and without any hesitation, he moved the reality stone to remove Hela's aging state and let her return to youth. As her skin became tender again, Hela also recovered from the blow, turned her head to look at Odin, opened her mouth to say something, but in the end, she didn't say a word. Odin looked at her and said with a smile, "Don't thank me. This is my last compensation as a father. Take Thor and the others away from Asgard, and don't come back." Perhaps because his life was coming to an end, this time, Odin's words were no longer as majestic as before, and he became very kind, just like an old father. Hearing Odin's words, Hela, who had always resented Odin, suddenly lost a lot of resentment in her heart, but still snorted coldly, "Stop pretending here. I don't need your care. You will never pay me back for what you owe me." After saying that, Hela suddenly stood in front of Odin and the others, looking at Tony fearlessly and said, "As long as I'm alive, don't even think about doing anything." Seeing this, Tony didn't react, but Odin became serious in an instant. "I said, take Thor and the others away." "I won't," Hela said stubbornly. And at the moment, when she finished speaking, Odin suddenly slapped her head with a palm, and the surging divine power surged, directly knocking her unconscious. Because she was caught off guard, Hela didn't react at all. After doing all this, Odin turned his head to look at another battlefield, and shouted loudly, "Thor." As soon as he finished speaking, Thor, who was fighting, repelled Shadow Eater with a hammer, and looked up at Odin. The next second, a black shadow flew towards him, and Odin's voice came at the same time. Take Hela and leave Asgard. As soon as these words came out, Thor's face changed. He was so focused on the battle that he didn't see what happened on Odin's battlefield. But when he heard Odin's tone of entrusting his orphan to someone else, he suddenly realized something. Father, get out. Without waiting for him to speak, Odin interrupted him directly. The next second, a terrifying divine power descended from the sky, covering Thor and the captain, and lifted their bodies to fly towards the Rainbow Bridge. Soon, the group was sent to Blue Star by Odin through the Rainbow Bridge. As they left, Odin breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time a crackling sound came from him. He had already reached his limit, and now he was forcibly exerting his strength. His body could no longer bear it, and was heading for collapse. At this time, Tony, who had been silent all this time, spoke again. Okay, old man, you've done your job. It's time to fulfill your promise. Of course. Odin nodded, stretched out his hand to summon the Eternal Spear, and wiped his palm across the spear. Suddenly, the Eternal Spear let out a whine, and Odin spurted out a mouthful of blood. Just now, he wiped off the mark he left on the Eternal Spear, and also wiped off the spirituality of the Eternal Spear. This was the spirituality that Odin cultivated himself. If he didn't wipe it out, Tony would have no chance of controlling the Eternal Spear. In fact, only Odin could do this. Otherwise, even if Tony had the strength to erase the mark of the Eternal Spear, it would greatly reduce the power of the Eternal Spear. After doing all this, Odin threw the Eternal Spear casually, and it immediately fell into Tony's hands. Feeling the coldness in his hands, Tony showed a satisfied smile on his face. Odin turned to look at Bol, and said with a wry smile, Father, I have implicated you. After saying this, Bol, who had broken both arms, shook his head and said casually, the old man has long been tired of living. Now I can die with my son. What's the harm? Hearing this, Odin smiled. As a father, he could naturally understand Bol's feelings. At that moment, he stopped talking, but a smile appeared on his face. The next second, his body spontaneously combusted, enveloping him. Seeing this, Bol also ignited the flames and burned his body. Not far away, Tony folded his hands and watched this scene. He didn't say anything, didn't disturb, and quietly watched the two people finish their last moments. He didn't worry that Odin lied to him. After all, Hela and others just left, not dead. If Odin lied to him, he would just kill them. So, he didn't worry at all that Odin was playing a trick on him. The flames burned for half an hour, and the bodies of Odin and Bol were completely turned into ashes. At the same time, two souls appeared in the same place. Unlike the souls of ordinary gods, the souls of Odin and Bor, one gold and one silver, are extremely extraordinary. Seeing this, Tony flashed and appeared in front of the two souls. Their eyes were closed, as if they were in a deep sleep. Tony was not surprised. Rather than saying that these two died in his hands, it would be better to say that their lifespans were exhausted, so naturally they would not be able to speak like ordinary gods who were killed. Mental power permeated from his mind. Tony used his mental power to transform into two substantial big hands, and slowly fell into the Shadow Kingdom with the souls of the two. As the souls of the two appeared, the black fog around the Shadow Kingdom was like a cat seeing a mouse, pounced on it crazily, and devoured the souls of the two. Tony watched this scene with great interest, wanting to see what changes would happen to the shadow world after devouring the souls of Odin and Bor. Unfortunately, the speed of the black gas devouring was too slow. After watching for a while, Tony completely lost his patience and could only turn around and leave the Shadow Kingdom and return to Asgard. Chapter 195, The End of Asgard. On the Asgard, Tony shook his head slowly as he looked at the Asgard below, which had been completely destroyed after a great battle. He did not return to the palace, but turned to the border of Asgard. In the starry sky at the border, there were still traces of the resistance against the Dark Elves. Everything seemed to be the same as yesterday, but the Asgard guards who once guarded the border had long disappeared. The 9 kingdoms guarding the border now only had 8 kingdoms left. Even the gods who were high above had completely disappeared at this moment. Tony took all of this in his eyes. His face remained calm, but he told himself in his heart that weakness was the original sin, and he must continue to become stronger. And just as Tony was walking along the border, suddenly, the space beside him fluctuated, and the next second, Loki slowly stepped out. Turning his head to look at him, Tony raised a smile at the corner of his mouth. "You are late. Thor and the others have left the blue planet." "I know." "Oh." Tony looked at Loki in confusion. "I feel the power fluctuation of Odin." After listening to this explanation, Tony nodded in understanding. "Is there anything you want to ask?" Tony said calmly. He knew Loki must have a lot of questions to ask, otherwise he wouldn't show up at this time. Hearing this, Loki was silent for a while, and then he said, "Has Odin fallen?" "No, but he will soon." "What, do you want to plead for him?" Tony was a little curious. "If I plead, will you let him go?" "No." Tony refused directly. Although he valued Loki, he only valued him. "So, it doesn't seem to matter whether I plead or not. It's just that there is a gap in my heart for a while. The person I have always hated suddenly disappeared one day, and I felt like a piece was missing in my heart." "Are you sure it's hatred? Not to attract his attention?" Tony said playfully. Loki smiled dumbly. "That's right. I'm like a child who wants attention, but unfortunately he never looked at me. In the end, he arranged a way out for Thor and Hela, but he didn't mention you." "Do you know why?" Tony asked. Loki hesitated for a moment and said uncertainly, "Maybe he forgot." "No, he just knows that you don't need him to worry about it. After all, you and I are in the same group. On Blue Star, parents pay the most attention to naughty and impulsive children, and they will ignore sensible children. They think that children can take care of themselves, but they don't know that even sensible children need their parents' care." Tony said calmly, and Loki listened quietly. The two chatted for a while. Suddenly, the whole god's domain was shaken at this moment. The next second, blood rain fell from the sky, and strong sadness filled the world. In the sky, the floating continent that had been floating in the sky seemed to have lost some support at this moment, and fell directly from the sky. Boom. The floating continent fell to the ground, and the whole god's domain was shaken. The aftermath of destruction hit all directions, and the mountains collapsed, and the ground cracked. It was like the end of the world. The scene appeared in front of Tony and Loki. Tony couldn't help but sigh at this scene. Odin has fallen completely. After saying this, Loki, who was following him, trembled slightly, and a look of crying and laughing appeared on his face. Seeing this, Tony patted his shoulder without saying a word. After a long time, Loki regained his composure. Unlike the previous pretending to be calm, he now seemed to have put down all the shackles, and the whole person calmed down from the heart. Odin can be said to be his inner demon all the time. There is no hatred or love, but he is like a shackle that binds Loki, making him unable to be himself. Now, the shackles are broken, and Loki can be said to be reborn from the ashes in a sense. However, Tony did not continue to pay attention to these, because he had more important things to do at this moment. The EC Protoss was almost completely wiped out, and Odin, the king of the gods, also died completely. Although there are still many powerful forces in Asgard, compared with the EC Protoss, the master of Asgard, those forces and races have become insignificant. This also means that Tony's long-planned world devouring can finally be put on the agenda. Slowly closing his eyes, Tony checked the arrangement of the formation through the perspective of the Black Shadow Ninja. At present, the arrangement of the formation has entered the final stage, and it will not take too long to be completely completed, so Tony also waited patiently. In a blink of an eye, 3 days passed. On this day, the formation was finally arranged, and Tony finally opened his eyes. Looking at Loki who had been waiting by his side, Tony raised his mouth and said, "Let's go. It's time for us to leave this world." Hearing this, Loki nodded. At that moment, the two left the god's domain together and came to the outer space. Floating in the starry sky, looking at the vast world below, Tony's mind moved, and the dark red reality gem suddenly appeared in his hand. Looking at the reality stone in his hand, Tony said to himself with a smile on his face, "Your chance to advance has come. Go and enjoy your feast." After that, Tony threw the reality stone out casually, and suddenly, the reality stone began to expand continuously, and countless dark red particles quickly surrounded the entire Asgard. The originally azure Asgard, at this moment, became red under the rendering of the dark red particles. The next second, the reality stone began to wriggle like a human chewing food, and a crisp snapping sound suddenly echoed in Tony's ears. The two people's eyes completely penetrated the reality stone at this moment, looking at Asgard, only to see that Asgard's sky began to crack, the earth began to break, and countless creatures went crazy in this doomsday-like disaster. In the land of frost, countless giants tried to rush out of Asgard, but unfortunately Asgard, which was wrapped in the reality stone, had completely become a prisoner, unable to enter or leave. In the atrium, where Mimi sleeps, Mimi, who has transformed into a sacred tree, roars and wants to rush out of Asgard, but no matter how he rushes, he can never open a gap. In addition to these strong men, there are more weak mortals. Facing this doomsday scene, they are completely powerless and can only pray for the salvation of the gods. Unfortunately, they don't know that the gods have fallen long before them. In this way, under the gaze of the two, Asgard collapsed bit by bit, and the gods in the realm of gods went completely crazy, including the world will in the dark. At this moment, it can only make waves of wailing under the oppression of the reality gem. Asgard is completely on the road to extinction. Chapter 196. Stay calm and don't be impulsive. Brilliant fireworks bloomed in the starry sky, and the bright light cut through the darkness of the universe. The collapse of one world set off a series of cosmic storms. With the cooperation of the reality gem and the formation, Asgard was swallowed like a piece of candy. Soon, Tony recalled the reality gem, and a huge black hole was left where Asgard was before. The floating dust in the universe was swallowed by the black hole, and the terrifying suction engulfed everything around. The destruction of Asgard is insignificant to the entire universe, but for this starfield, the impact is just about to begin. However, all this has nothing to do with Tony. Looking at Loki, who was a little absent-minded beside him, Tony raised his hand and patted his shoulder, and said calmly, "Let's go." Hearing this, Loki nodded, and then the two of them disappeared into the starry sky together. Although the reality gem is powerful, it still takes time to digest Asgard. Now it is just swallowed whole, so Tony temporarily sealed the reality gem in the Shadow Kingdom. When Asgard disappeared, the 9 realms were also severely affected, especially Blue Star. At the moment of Asgard's disappearance, a global earthquake was directly triggered. Fortunately, the magnitude of the earthquake was not strong, but countless people were injured or missing. SHIELD, Hela, who temporarily settled in SHIELD, suddenly cried out in pain. Her calm face showed a pain that was difficult to hide. Seeing this scene, Thor and others changed their expressions. Thor immediately stepped forward and said, "What's wrong with you? Are you okay?" After the words fell, Hela hesitated to speak, but kept crying. After a long time, Hela's expression gradually calmed down, and an inexplicable sadness suddenly appeared on her face. "I feel it, Asgard is gone." This was the first sentence Hela said after calming down. Suddenly, everyone who was looking at her with a worried face changed their expressions. Especially Thor, his tiger eyes were filled with tears. As the saying goes, men don't shed tears easily, just because they are not sad. The death of his family and the destruction of his hometown, this series of blows completely broke Thor's psychological defenses. How could this happen? How could this happen? Thor muttered to himself, and the captains and others around him looked at him with a look of pain on their faces. Although Thor had expected this result, after being sent out of Asgard, he still found it difficult to accept it when things became a reality. At this moment, the door of the conference room opened, and Nick walked in. Looking at the people gathered together, a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. However, he did not speak when he noticed that the atmosphere was not right. He quietly watched Thor and the others vent, and at the same time, asked the captain what happened. After getting the captain's answer, Nick looked at the depressed Thor and the others, and couldn't help but comfort them. "I'm sorry, we couldn't stop this tragedy. But I hope you can cheer up, at least you are still alive, and you still have a chance to get revenge. If you become depressed, you may really not be able to get revenge." Nick kept talking, and he knew that he was talking nonsense, but he could only say this, and this was the only thing he could do. At this moment, another person walked in, Nick's assistant. "Director, I just checked and found out that Tony is back," the assistant said loudly with a serious face. As his voice fell, the atmosphere on the scene suddenly changed, and the captains and others showed angry expressions on their faces. And Thor and Hela's faces were full of coldness, staring at the assistant intently, which brought him great pressure. Feeling the feeling of common hatred and hatred emanating from everyone, Nick's face changed slightly, and he quickly raised his hands and said, "Everyone, calm down, be calm, don't be impulsive." At this moment, he was afraid that these guys would go to Tony for trouble if they were impulsive. If they could beat him, it would be fine, but it was not appropriate to go to the door and give yourself a head after being beaten up. Fortunately, what he was worried about did not happen. Although everyone's faces were full of anger, they did not do anything extreme. Seeing this, Nick breathed a sigh of relief, then turned to look at the nervous assistant, coughed and asked, "When did Tony show up? Where did you find him?" 20 minutes ago, the agent we arranged at the door of Stark Industries sent back the news. "Okay, I got it. You go down first." Nick nodded and waved to send the assistant out. After receiving the order, the assistant felt as if he had been pardoned. The depressing atmosphere in the room made him almost breathless, and he naturally didn't want to stay here any longer. After the assistant left, Nick clapped his hands and looked at everyone and said, "Everyone, I think you all heard it clearly, so our trouble is coming." "I don't know. Do you have anything to say?" Nick asked. Hearing this, everyone looked at each other. No one spoke, and they didn't know what to say. Seeing this, Nick's eyes flashed with helplessness, and he could only change the way of asking, "Do you think Tony's return this time will have any impact on Blue Star?" Before, he would definitely not ask this question. After all, in his opinion, no matter how strong Tony is, he can't destroy Blue Star. However, after knowing the Asgard, he suddenly didn't dare to guarantee it. Since Tony can destroy Asgard, who knows if he will have ideas about Blue Star. Therefore, even if Tony has not shown any inclination, he can't help but be prepared. And this time, Hela in the crowd spoke up. "Do you still need to ask about this? With the previous experience of Asgard in front of us, do you think he will give up the fat piece of Blue Star? You can't say that. After all, this is his hometown, and his relatives and friends also live on this planet." The captain disagreed. Hearing this, Hela's mouth suddenly showed a sneer. "Even if what you said makes sense, have you forgotten how Midgard was destroyed? Even if Tony didn't attack Blue Star, do you think he would let those humans outside go?" Hela sneered, and the captain's expressions changed immediately. Before, they were all stunned by the destruction of Asgard, and didn't think about anything else. Now after Hela's reminder, they suddenly realized that, even if Tony didn't have the idea of destroying Blue Star, it didn't mean that he didn't have the idea of destroying humans. According to what happened in Midgard, humans were completely the food for his army. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197, The Joy of Reunion. The expressions of the captain and several others changed as Hela spoke. Seeing this, Nick, who didn't know the inside story, couldn't help but ask. In this regard, the captain did not hide anything, and told the story again. After listening, Nick broke out in a cold sweat. He had tried his best to overestimate the degree of danger Tony was in, but now it seems that he still greatly underestimated the danger brought by Tony's coming. This also made him a little curious. What exactly happened to Tony in Asgard? How did he become so dangerous after going on a long journey? Although he was not an easy person to deal with before, at least he was still in the control range. Now, it has completely exceeded this range. Frowning with a headache, looking at the helpless people, Nick couldn't help but sigh helplessly. Okay, nothing should happen in the short term. You are all tired, take a rest first. I will have someone monitor Tony. If there is any problem, I will notify you as soon as possible. However, I also want to remind you that it is better not to appear in front of Tony recently. I will notify you when I think of a way to deal with him," Nick said in a warning tone, but his eyes mostly stayed on Hela and Thor. Obviously, this was mainly said to the two of them. After all, their hometown had just been destroyed by Tony. He was afraid that the two of them would go to Tony for revenge on impulse, which would not only easily anger Tony, but also give away their heads and lose strength in vain. However, he thought his eyes were very hidden, but he didn't know that everything was seen by Hela. If it was when he was just born, Hela would definitely dig out his eyeballs. Who would he look down on? But after experiencing Tony's beating, she also completely recognized the reality and knew that she could not beat Tony's opponent alone. Therefore, although the power of S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed weak, she didn't want to give up this help. At that moment, he nodded with a smile and said, "Don't worry, we will stay here obediently." Hearing Hela's promise, Nick smiled and felt relieved. Then he did not stay here any longer and left the meeting room directly. Back in the office, Nick locked the door of the office and opened his safe. Soon, an old-fashioned communicator appeared in his hand. This was one of his biggest trump cards. He didn't want to use it, but Tony's strength was getting stronger and stronger, and the danger was getting bigger and bigger. He was afraid that, if he didn't use it again, he would really have no way to stop Tony. But when the time came, he still hesitated. Should he activate the communicator and play this trump card? Thinking constantly in his heart, Nick was a little undecided for a while, and he couldn't help but light a cigarette and fell into thinking. Smoke lingered in front of him, and his face seemed to flicker under the cover of fireworks. On the other side, at Stark Industries, when Tony appeared in the company, the hot girl at the front desk almost didn't recognize her boss. After all, Tony had disappeared for almost a year, and time can always wash away everything. Fortunately, this situation did not last long. As a well-known playboy, he was finally recognized. At that moment, the news of Tony's return quickly spread throughout the company. In the president's office in the Stark Industrial Building, Potts lowered her head to handle documents with a very serious expression. She was wearing a white professional suit, and her slender legs were wrapped in flesh-colored stockings, full of uniform temptation. When Tony pushed the door and walked in quietly, he looked at Potts, who didn't notice him at all, and a warm smile appeared on his face. Without noticing that someone was approaching, Potts was reviewing a document. At this moment, a pair of hands embraced her slender waist. The sudden touch scared Potts, and she screamed immediately. Then Potts stepped directly on Tony's instep with her high heels without thinking. Tony immediately took a breath of cold air, pretending to be in pain, and then smiled bitterly. "What, are you planning to murder your husband?" Hearing the familiar voice coming from her ear, Potts, who was about to struggle, was stunned. She turned her head to look at Tony, and Tony's smiling face came into her eyes. After seeing Tony's face, Potts completely calmed down, and at the same time, 2 lines of tears instantly flowed from her eyes. Drops of tears fell on the back of Tony's hand. Tony felt distressed when he saw it, and his tone suddenly became softer and said, "Why are you crying? You are the president now. If someone sees you, they will laugh at you. Asshole." Potts cried and cursed, then turned around and hugged Tony tightly with both hands. There was not much conversation, and the two had long passed the era when they needed sweet words to maintain their feelings. For a while, there was no other sound in the office except Potts sobbing. When Potts had almost vented his emotions, Tony was about to speak, but Potts suddenly kissed him directly. Seeing this, Tony was stunned for a moment. After reacting, Tony took the initiative and moved his hands up and down. Soon, a strange sound came faintly from the office. The female secretary who was about to report the company's business stopped at the door. Her face turned red, and then she stood guard at the door. After 2 hours, the sound in the office dissipated. Potts, who was radiant, tidied her clothes, sat elegantly in the office chair and joked, "You still remember to come back? I thought you were missing. You disappeared for a year, and you are not afraid that I will sell the company." Potts said proudly, and it can be heard that she still has some resentment in her heart. In response, Tony, who was sitting on the sofa, smiled immediately. "Why didn't I feed you just now? You are so resentful. Do you want to do it again?" After speaking, Tony raised his eyebrows. Hearing his words, Pot's face suddenly turned red, and she gave Tony a coquettish roll of the eyes. You just want to bully me, go do what you need to do, I still have to work. After saying that, Potts lowered her head with a ruddy face. She was already shy enough when she took the initiative to do that, and now Tony took the initiative to bring it up, which made her blush even more, so she directly ordered him to leave. Seeing this, Tony did not continue to tease her, but smiled and said, okay, then I'll leave first. I'll pick you up after get off work, and we'll have dinner together tonight. After saying that, Tony stood up and kissed her on the lips, then turned and walked out of the office. As soon as he opened the door, Tony immediately saw the female secretary guarding the door. She was flushed, her legs were close together, and she lowered her head when she saw Tony. Suddenly, Tony laughed and walked away slowly. Chapter 198, The Evolution of Jarvis. At the beach villa, when Tony entered the door, Jarvis' voice suddenly rang out in the villa. Welcome back, sir. Hearing this long-lost voice, Tony's face suddenly showed a smile. Long time no see, Jarvis. Where is Loki? After returning to Blue Star, Tony, who was worried about Potts, separated from Loki directly. Sir, Mr. Loki is in the underground laboratory, and his research seems to have made new progress. Oh. Tony's face flashed a strange look, and he turned around and walked directly to the underground laboratory. Soon, Tony saw Loki in a white coat in the laboratory. At this moment, he was standing in front of a pile of machines and studying seriously, looking like a scientific researcher. It's really good. He entered the research state as soon as he came back. Seeing his look, Tony immediately smiled and greeted him. Jarvis said that your research has made new progress. Let me take a look. Hearing the voice, Loki glanced at Tony and then continued to move. There was already some progress before, and I'm just continuing the previous research now. Tell me in detail, speak frankly. Tony was a little curious. Although he didn't understand scientific research, it didn't prevent him from being interested in it. Loki also knew that Tony knew nothing about these things, so he tried to simplify the language and eliminated some professional terms and said, it's actually very simple. I asked Jarvis to cooperate with me to do some research, and found that the most difficult part of mechanical life is not the structure of the body, but the birth of spiritual will. So, I use the Mind Stone to inject spirit into the machine, and used means to make them produce self-will. Now it's almost done. As long as it can produce self-awareness, it can be considered a real life form. Hearing this, Tony's mind suddenly understood. Of course, he knew that things would definitely not be as simple as Loki said, but it didn't matter. He just needed to know that Loki's research was about to succeed. How long will it take? I'll watch from the side. It shouldn't affect anything. No, it will take a while. Okay, I'll wait. After that, Tony stopped interfering with Loki and watched him gradually put the machine in front of him into a human form. Soon, the robot opened its eyes and an electronic synthesized voice came out of its mouth. Hello, Master. Number 01 is at your service. Hearing this, Tony couldn't help but ask, did it succeed? After he finished speaking, Loki frowned and shook his head. No, although it is intelligent, it is still a dead object and has no will of its own. But wait until I finish the last step and then see. While explaining, Loki took out the Mind Scepter, and the divine power in his body flowed into the scepter. Suddenly, the mind gem embedded in the scepter lit up directly. Soon, Tony felt a huge amount of mental power being injected into no one's body. No one's eyes suddenly flickered and began to undergo some kind of inexplicable transformation. As time passed, the expectation in Tony's eyes gradually subsided, and a trace of disappointment flashed in his heart. Although he didn't know how to create a machine life, in his perception, number 1 never produced the fluctuations that life should have. If nothing unexpected happened, Loki's experiment failed. Sure enough, soon Loki stopped his actions, staring at number 1 with a frown, muttering to himself, how could this happen? The combination of intelligence and spirit should be enough to give birth to self-will and evolve into a real life form. How could there be no reaction? After thinking for a long time, Loki's eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of enlightenment, and he immediately turned to look at Tony. I think I may know the problem. What's the reason? Tony asked curiously. It should be because of the lack of intelligence So even if you inject spiritual power, it is difficult for it to transform into a real life form, so I need your help. Tony was stunned. How can I help you? I don't know much about this. Tony touched his nose guiltily, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. After all, he was the one who tricked Loki into creating a mechanical life. Now admitting that he knows nothing, he feels like he is going to die. However, he was thick-skinned enough, and firmly believed that, as long as he was not embarrassed, it would be others who would be embarrassed, so he calmly refused. Loki was not surprised by this, or he was not aware of it at all. I'm not asking you to help me with the research. I mean, can I let Jarvis do the experiment? Its intelligence is definitely enough. After injecting mental power, it is very likely to evolve self-awareness. As soon as this was said, Tony suddenly realized, and then shrugged and said, this matter depends on Jarvis's opinion. I don't care. Jarvis. Tony took the initiative to call. I'm here, sir. You should have heard what Loki said. What do you think? I think I can try. Jarvis' tone was as calm as ever. After listening, Tony nodded immediately. Okay, he agreed. You do it. As soon as he finished speaking, Loki took action. He connected the server that Jarvis parasitized to number 1, and after some operations, no one's intelligence was exchanged with Jarvis. Soon, Jarvis, who had gained the ability to move, moved. Is this what it feels like to have a body? So wonderful? Jarvis looked at his palm and said, his usually calm tone showed a rare hint of surprise. This hint of surprise came and went quickly, but it did not escape Tony and Loki's perception. At that moment, Tony and Loki looked at each other, and a hint of shock flashed across their faces. Jarvis seemed to be not far from becoming a real mechanical life. Thinking of this, Loki could not wait to act, and once again activated the Mind Stone to inject a large amount of mental power into Jarvis. As the mental power was infused, Jarvis seemed to be stilled, standing there blankly. Soon, in Tony's perception, a special wave came from Jarvis. Tony was very familiar with this wave, and he had felt it in all intelligent life. It's done, Tony said in surprise. Loki also stopped moving at this moment, and nodded with joy in his eyes. It's done. Soon, Jarvis resumed his movements again. Compared with before, his eyes became more lively, and he even moved his body subconsciously. Boss, I think I need to change my body. This body is too rough, and makes me uncomfortable. After hearing Jarvis's initiative to ask, the two who were a little uncertain at first finally confirmed that Jarvis really evolved from artificial intelligence into mechanical life. Only life will make its own requests. Although artificial intelligence looks smart, it is more of a follower of program settings. Don't worry, no problem, I'll change it for you later. Tony responded with a smile, his face full of joy. Chapter 199 Pietro and Wanda. The computing power of artificial intelligence is stronger than that of humans. No matter how talented humans are, they cannot match artificial intelligence in computing. It's just that artificial intelligence lacks creativity, so it has certain defects, including Jarvis before. Now, Jarvis has completely evolved into a real-life form, making up for this defect. I believe that, after he adapts for a period of time, he can replace himself in research and development. At that time, all the scientific research projects of Stark Industries can be handed over to Jarvis. Maybe he can also help himself complete the things he has not completed, such as rubbing a set of armor by hand. Thinking of this, Tony's smile became even bigger. By the way, the experiment was successful, so can we mass produce intelligent life? Tony looked at Loki with expectation. Hearing this, Loki rolled his eyes directly. Although the experiment was successful, the key is that Jarvis's intelligence level was already very high before, so he completed the experiment. With my current means, it will take some time to successfully create a high intelligence like Jarvis, so I have to continue my research. Is that so? Okay. Tony shrugged helplessly, happy for nothing. However, with a breakthrough, the subsequent progress will be faster, so Tony immediately calmed down his anxiety. Then you continue your research. Jarvis, you assist Loki. I'm leaving first. Yes. Okay, sir. Loki and Jarvis responded at the same time, and Tony turned and walked out of the laboratory. As soon as he left the laboratory, the smile on Tony's face disappeared, and he was no longer happy. Because just now, he suddenly thought of a question, whether Jarvis would have other ideas like the original plot. After all, he is now a real life form, not an artificial intelligence. After thinking for a long time, Tony shook his head helplessly. There is no way to guarantee such a thing. Although the predecessor had input the 3 laws of artificial intelligence when creating Jarvis to prevent Jarvis from getting out of control, who knows if it will work for Jarvis, who has evolved into a life form. Fortunately, Tony is not afraid. Even if Jarvis really gets out of control, as long as he wants, he can beat him back to a pile of scrap metal at any time. Therefore, such worries did not stay in his mind for too long, and were swept out of his mind. Just as Jarvis successfully completed the evolution, on the other side, inside SHIELD, a man and a woman walked towards Nick's office under the guidance of Nick's assistant, but Nick's assistant's eyes looked a little dull at the moment. When the 3 arrived at the door of Nick's office, the assistant fainted immediately, and the man and the woman pushed the door open and walked in. In the office, Nick was processing documents, and suddenly heard the sound of the door being pushed open. Immediately, Nick pulled out a laser gun from the drawer under the table like lightning, and aimed at the door. After seeing the 2 people at the door clearly, Nick immediately said, "Who are you?" His tone was very calm, without any panic. After all, this was his home court. Although he didn't know how the 2 people in front of him appeared in front of him, as long as he delayed for a few minutes, someone would come naturally. The 2 people pointed at by the gun were not panicked at the moment, and even the man showed a disdainful smile on his face. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Pietro, and this is my sister Wanda. We are affiliated with Hydra." Pietro directly revealed his identity. Suddenly, Nick's face became a little weird. Has the world changed, or have I not kept up with the times? The Hydra people dared to appear in front of the director of SHIELD. They didn't take me seriously at all. Nick thought a little strangely, but there was no emotion on his face. "Oh, I don't know. What do you 2 want to talk to me about? Is my assistant alive or dead?" "Don't worry, he's still alive. He just fainted temporarily. He will be fine after a good sleep. As for us looking for you, it's to cooperate with you, or to cooperate with SHIELD," Pietro said slowly. After hearing his words, Nick decisively put away his gun and said, "Please sit down." Then you 2. Seeing his speed faster than Opera's face changing, Pietro and the other man were obviously stunned for a moment, but they reacted quickly, and walked directly into the office, and sat opposite Nick. With his hands on the table, Nick looked at the 2 people in front of him, and his thoughts turned quickly. He raised his gun before, because no one in SHIELD would enter his room without knocking, so all behaviors without knocking could be regarded as intrusion. That's why he raised his gun the moment the 2 entered the room. The reason why he put down his gun later was that the 2 men didn't show any fear from beginning to end, and it was obvious that the gun in his hand could not threaten them. In addition, he asked and found out that his assistant just fainted, not dead, so the chances of the 2 coming to cause trouble were not high. It was precisely because of this that he decisively put down his gun. After all, since they had no hostility and the gun in his hand could not threaten them, it didn't make any sense to take the gun or not. "I don't know what you 2 want to cooperate with me?" Nick sorted out his thoughts and took the initiative to ask. At this time, members of SHIELD had gathered at the door of the office, carrying the assistant at the door away, and a group of fully armed SHIELD members directly blocked the door of the office. This also made Nick more confident about the next conversation. "It's very simple. We want to cooperate with SHIELD to deal with someone," Pietro said slowly. "Who?" "Tony." He whispered the name, and Nick's face changed immediately, but soon returned to calm. "If you want to deal with Tony, just go by yourselves. Why are you looking for me? Can't Hydra deal with an ordinary person?" Hearing this, Pietro smiled. "Director Nick, let's be frank. Although our Hydra intelligence is not as good as your SHIELD, it is not much worse. We know how powerful Tony is. So, we came to you to join forces." Pietro looked serious, but Nick didn't seem to be tempted at all. "Even so, why should I cooperate with you? Isn't it good for us SHIELD to be at peace now? Do you think I will anger him to help you?" Nick's tone was a little sarcastic. Hearing this, Petro's eyes flashed with anger. As a young man, he didn't have the scheming of Nick. However, thinking about the purpose of this trip, he finally endured it and said word by word, "Really? If you are really at peace, why does S.H.I.E.L.D. monitor him 24 hours a day?" Chapter 200 Seeking the Skin of a Tiger. After Petro finished speaking, Nick's face changed slightly, and Petro continued, "Tony has what we want, and he has a grudge against us brothers and sisters, so you don't have to doubt our determination to fight him. Similarly, I believe that Director Nick has long wanted to get rid of him. After all, how can you tolerate a disaster wandering in front of you? So, Director Nick, give me a straightforward answer. Do you want to cooperate or not? If you still refuse, then we'll leave." Petro said a lot in one breath, making Nick silent. To be fair, does he want to get rid of Tony? There is no doubt that he does. However, he also knows how powerful Tony is, and even more clearly, he directly destroyed a world not long ago. Therefore, even if Petro showed sincerity, Nick still couldn't make up his mind. After all, if the action failed, the consequences would be completely unbearable for him. But he was unwilling to give up just like that. Hydra's power was still not weak. If they joined forces, the chances of winning would undoubtedly be much stronger than S.H.I.E.L.D. fighting alone. Since you have investigated Tony, you must be very clear about his strength, so I want to know where your confidence comes from. Nick probed. He wanted to know more information. But Petro was not stupid, so he would not tell him everything. A smile appeared on his face and he said, "Director Nick, since we dare to plot against him, we are naturally a little sure. It depends on whether you dare to follow." Hearing this, Nick frowned and became more hesitant. First, Tony was too dangerous and uncontrollable, so he didn't want to give up any chance. Second, since Hydra dared to take action, he didn't believe that they would be unprepared. So, after hesitating again and again, Nick finally nodded and said, "Cooperation is fine, but I want to see sincerity first." Looking at Nick's firm look, Petro knew that this was Nick's bottom line, and he nodded slowly and said, "Okay, then wait for our good news." After that, Petro got up and walked out the door. Wanda followed him without saying a word. Nick watched the two leave with an inexplicable light in his eyes. Soon, the captain and others came to Nick's office. Seeing that only Nick was there, the captain frowned and asked, "Where are the intruders?" "Gone." Nick lowered his head and said, "Gone." The captain was a little unbelievable. "Those guys are from Hydra. How could you let them go?" the captain questioned. When he came, he had already received the news that Hydra had invaded S.H.I.E.L.D., so he hurried here. After all, he and Hydra are considered to be enemies. Listening to the captain's questioning, Nick looked up at him and then said in a calm tone, "I have reached a cooperation with them." As soon as these words came out, the captain's mentality exploded instantly. "Nick, have you forgotten your identity? How can you cooperate with those rats in the sewer?" Looking at the captain's excitement, Nick had expected it. After all, the hatred between the captain and Hydra is the deepest. If possible, he didn't want to tell the captain about this, but this matter couldn't be concealed at all. The captain would know sooner or later, so it's better to make it clear at the beginning. "I don't want to cooperate with them either, but there is no way. They invited me to deal with Tony together," Nick said helplessly. As his voice fell, the captain was like a rooster with its neck strangled, and his voice was instantly silent. If it was about other things, he would definitely have to reason with Nick, but when it came to Tony, even if he was unwilling in his heart, he had to admit that with the current power of S.H.I.E.L.D., he could not deal with him at all. So, when Nick told the reason, he immediately lost his confidence. But he still murmured unwillingly, "Even so, you can't cooperate with Hydra. Don't you know who those guys are?" After that, the captain turned around and walked out the door without waiting for Nick to reply, and left the office directly. Looking at the captain's slightly bleak back, Nick sighed helplessly. Weakness is the original sin. Nick has always understood this, but he didn't expect that this kind of thing would happen to him one day. He also knew that Hydra was not a good thing, but what could he do? Tony was like a time bomb. No one knew when he would explode, and he had had enough of this kind of life of fear, so even if he knew that cooperating with Hydra was like seeking the skin of a tiger, he couldn't refuse. On the other side, after Petro and the others left S.H.I.E.L.D., they quickly returned to the Hydra base in New York, a luxurious villa. In the villa, when Pilot and the others entered the door, an expressionless Hydra member immediately came to greet them. "Mr. Petro, Senator John is here." Hearing this, Petro nodded and then walked towards the hall, while Wanda went upstairs directly without him. When they came to the living room, a middle-aged fat man in a suit was sitting on the sofa waiting. He was the Senator John mentioned by the Hydra members. He was a member of the US Congress and came to power with the support of Hydra. Seeing Petro, John quickly stood up, and his greasy face was immediately filled with smiles. "Mr. Petro?" "Yeah." Petro nodded, then waved his hand and said, "Sit down." After speaking, John sat down again, but from the expression on his face, it can be seen that he was very nervous at the moment. Glancing at the car Petro, John organized his words in his mind and said carefully, "I wonder what Mr. Petro has to do in New York this time. As long as you need my service, Mr. Petro, just tell me. I will definitely do my best." It must be said that politicians speak well, and Petro smiled with satisfaction after listening. "You are polite, Senator John, but I do need your help with a small matter. I believe you have heard of the name of Stark Industries. They have been very active recently, and weapons have been sold to our territory. So, I would like to ask Senator John to help knock them." Petro said with a smile, and as soon as he finished speaking, John was immediately frightened and broke into a cold sweat. He certainly knew Stark Industries, the #1 arms dealer in the United States, a real behemoth. Compared with such an existence, he is just a congressman, no different from an ant on the ground, but he was asked to knock such an existence. Isn't it difficult for him? John showed an embarrassed expression on his face and said, "Mr. Petro, I'm just a small congressman. I'm afraid I can't do it." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.